Okay, members, the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast in Parliament buildings and online. I've also been asked to remind you again to be conscious that the new audio and video equipment in the rooms is significantly sharper. That means that, for example, when a committee meeting is in public session, side conversations are increasingly likely picked up by microphones. I want to advise those who are coming into the public gallery, you are very welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and all devices are muted. And you can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Password details are available on the gallery rules. And it's not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. Declaration of interest. Members, I would request that going forward that you declare any new interests that were not declared at our first meeting as relevant matters under discussion this week. The first item that I have on the agenda is an apology from the Chair of the Committee, Tom Elliott, who has been unexpectedly delayed, and also from Patsy McLone. And members, are you aware of any other apologies? Okay. Members, item 2 on the agenda is the draft minutes. I refer you to the minutes dated the 22nd of February. It's in your packet, pages 5 to 19. If any comments, are you content with the minutes? Content. And our members agree that I sign them, publish these on the website? Yep. Okay. Signed. Okay. Chairperson's business. As highlighted last week, there will likely be several items of chairperson's business at each meeting, and there are 2 today. And I refer you to the clerk's memo at pages 21 to 24 of the pack, summarising the informal meeting with Minister Muir and the Permanent Secretary, Katrina Godfrey, on the 20th of February. And members, at the meeting, subjects discussed included working relationships, Lough Neagh, bovine TB, environmental strategy and rural support. The committee will be meeting with the Minister formally next Tuesday, the 5th of March. And are members okay to note the memo?
Yes.
Okay. Members, refer to page 25 to 58 in your pack. 3 reports forwarded by the previous speaker regarding summaries of decision taken by Northern Ireland departments in accordance with the guidance issued by the Secretary of State on the provisions of the NI Executive Formations, etc. Act 2022. These decisions are the result of the exercise of departmental functions by senior officers of the NI departments during the period of absence of ministers. Information specific to DAERA can be found on pages 26, 35, 44 and 50. Members, these reports are included for your information. Have you any comment, or are you content to note?
Note.
Okay. We remain in public session to receive 2 briefings from the department, one from the Food, Farming and Rural Affairs Group, and second one from the Veterinary Service and Health Group. And firstly, I'd invite the departmental officials for the Food, Farming and Rural Affairs to the table. Good to see you, Norman, Alison and Teresa. Feels like the good old days again, back in the committee.
Indeed.
I'm only here temporarily till the chair returns. I want to welcome the 3 of you here this morning. Norman, the Deputy Secretary, Food, Farming and Rural Affairs; Teresa, Director of Rural Affairs; and Alison, the Director of Sustainable Agri-Food Development. And for this item, members, I refer you to pages 60 to 100 in your pack, DAERA First Day Brief, and to pages 101 to 126, DAERA Key Challenges. And following the briefing, I will open up the session to questions. So I'd like to just maybe give you this opportunity now to brief the committee, and after that, Chair, we'll take some questions. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. What I'd like to do this morning is really start off by introducing Food, Farming, Rural Affairs Group and what we do, and take a run through the key issues for us over the period ahead. So the group comprises about 1,150 staff, manages a budget of approximately 400 million. The largest part of that would be the ring-fence budget for farm, environmental and rural support. This is a resource budget with about a 21 million capital DEL budget. 6 divisions within the group. So Agricultural Policy Division is leading on the development of our new Farm Support and Development Programme. and that's replacing the legacy EU CAP measures. And so whilst the division has an overall lead on that programme, most of the other divisions within the group also have a contributing role through both policy and delivery of that programme. Then we have Sustainable Agri-Food Development Division. Alison is the director of that division. It covers a very broad range of matters relating to delivery of such as agri-food capital and non-capital schemes. Examples such as the Farm Business Investment Scheme, the Regional Food Programme. Also policy lead for agri-food marketing standards and labelling for a range of products, equine identification, administration of the Northern Ireland Horse Racing Fund, food supply chain security contingency planning, also leading on the development of a new food strategy framework for Northern Ireland, and also leading on a couple of the work streams under the Farm Support and Development Programme. That's Future Farm Capital Support and Supply Chain Policy. Then we have area-based schemes division. Primary function of that division is delivery of almost or approximately £300 million per annum of support to 24,000 farm businesses, and everything that you would associate with that. So the management of the schemes through the online single application form, which is actually opening tomorrow for this year's campaign. The inspection and control functions using remote technology, boots on the ground. Maintenance development of the land parcel identification system, which is the platform on which much of this is built, as well as debt recovery review of decision processes. So in addition to keeping our existing processes and schemes going, it's also has a major programme in preparing for the new. So leading on the developing of the systems and processes that will deliver the land-based and livestock heritage components of the new farm support and development programme. Then we have Rural Affairs Division. Teresa is Director of that division. So that undertakes DAERA's statutory duties on Rural Needs Act, responsible for delivery of projects in rural areas through executive and UK funds such as Peace Plus, City and Growth Deals and the Contingency Fund. And then supporting rural communities through measures such as tackling rural poverty, social isolation programme, the TRIPSI programme, and an important piece of work over the coming months and for the remainder of this year, starting to flesh out our future rural policy framework and the actions and measures that will be developed and delivered under that. Then we have Policy and Economics and Statistics Division. So that's, as the name would suggest, creates, publishes much of the information we have around food, agriculture, the environment, greenhouse gas emissions, rural economy, and provides economic and statistical advice across the department. But it too has a policy role, so it leads on developing education and knowledge policy for the department in keeping with our delivering our policy agenda. It also has a role in seeking to influence UK government policy on international trade matters and on immigration and labour, which is obviously a pressing issue, a very topical issue at this point in time. And also provides advice across the department in terms of UK subsidy control and EU state aid matters. Finally then we have the College of Agriculture, Food and Rural Enterprise, CAFRE. So that's delivering further and higher education to around 1,900 students across 3 campuses covering agriculture, horticulture, equine and food. But also has a very significant knowledge transfer and innovation programme covering the main agricultural enterprises, sustainable land management, food technology, typically delivering to about 13,000 people per annum across the industry. But it too has a policy lead role, so it's within the Farm Support and Development Programme, so it's taking the lead on what the new knowledge transfer and innovation programme will look like for the period ahead. Also in terms of horticulture, and we've got ambitions to grow that sector, generational renewal and rumen genetics programme. So that gives you a flavour of what the group looks like, the areas we cover. You can see it's a very broad range of topics, pretty busy work agenda. In terms of the big ticket items for us for the coming year, we'll clearly transition from policy development to policy implementation. when it comes to our farm support and development programme. That will be a major focus. A couple of those elements of those are already up and running. You're probably aware of the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, but we've recently launched the Beef Carbon Reduction Scheme. Over the coming months, we'll plan to roll out pilots on farming for the generations, horticulture, farming with nature too. We'd expect to see the ruminant genetics programme coming online later on this spring. Carbon footprinting, taking significant strides forward on that as well. And we'll continue to work with our stakeholder group, which we've used in a co-design process to flesh out and finalise other elements of the programme, such as the Future Farm Sustainability Scheme, Suckler Cow Measure, which is aimed to reduce emissions and improve efficiency. And of course, building the architecture to deliver all of this significant programme. And our rollout plan was published last June, where we have a phased implementation which will take us through to 2026 for that programme. Also want to make significant progress over the coming months on Peace Plus, city and growth deals, another important area. And as I mentioned earlier, taking forward further policy work to flesh out and give shape to rural policy framework and ensure that it complements these interventions, but also meshes with the work of other departments and, most importantly, delivers impact. So Teresa's team will be working on that, but also working to develop policy proposals and support the reopening of the Rural Micro Capital Grant Scheme, Rural Business Development Grant Scheme. So those both have been undergoing evaluation of what has gone before, looking at the lessons learned and what has been achieved. And that feeds in then to proposals on the opening of future schemes, subject to budget availability. And we will be bringing that to the Minister for his consideration in March. On Alison's side, we really would like to progress the cross-cutting food strategic framework. And that's seeking to underpin cross-departmental work where food is a common theme. This work did start some time ago. It culminated in a public consultation in the autumn of 2021. Unfortunately, it was interrupted then by the suspension of the executive, and we would like to pick this up again and move it forward, and we will be discussing that with the Minister shortly. I'd also mention we have very ambitious plans for CAFRE campuses at Greenmount and Loughrea. Significant investment required to ensure that the buildings and facilities are fit for the future, meeting needs of staff, students and the industry. And we have a number of rather ageing buildings now, over 60 years old, getting a bit tired, and that currently are used for education and residential accommodation, staff offices, etc. So we'll continue to progress our plans for that redevelopment this year, and subject to securing the necessary funding, we'd hope to start construction next year. And that will be a 6-year build phase, so it's a significant capital investment programme in the future of our education. So that gives you a sort of flavour of some of the big ticket items we'll be pushing forward. Obviously there's quite a bit across the group, but I'll pause there. Hopefully that gives you a flavour of some of the things we're covering, and happy to take questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Norman, for that very comprehensive overview. Very helpful. I'm going to maybe ask a couple of questions myself, and if you want to indicate, anyone wants to indicate, please tell us if you want to have your name down for a question. I suppose, Norman, obviously we've been, as individual members, and even formally and before, we've been engaging with many rural stakeholders, even during the course of the past number of years whenever the institutions weren't in place. But I suppose one of the things that I pick up a lot when speaking to the farming community is, you touched on transition. Farmers have a lot of questions as to what will happen to their entitlements whenever we move over into the new regime, in terms of the value of their entitlements. Will they carry over? That's a big question, that farmers are asking. Could you maybe clarify that, Norman?
The communication of this programme is very important, and we have a communication strand that's working up all of that. I've been out around probably about 9 or 10 different public meetings around this. We've probably had about, at this stage, probably a couple of thousand farmers have attended those. But recognise that there's still a significant communication issue around all of this as we roll this out. So in terms of the transition from the basic payment scheme to the farm sustainability, yes, there will be a carry forward of entitlements in terms of the number that you have, as long as you meet the conditions of the new scheme. But as we've said, then the value of those entitlements, we're not going to rebase entitlements like we did back in 2015, where we issued across the land that farmers declared in the first area. No, the number you have at the minute will be the number that will transition across. Yeah. The unit value then will reflect the fact that we're starting to redistribute support into the other measures. So yesterday we announced that there would be a redistribution of 9% away from the basic payment scheme this year to start funding the beef carbon reduction scheme and the beginning of the suckler cow measure from January of 2025. And so over time that redistribution will continue. So for example, when Farming with Nature comes on board, more of the resource will start to move across into Farming with Nature programme that we would hope will be a large landscape scale programme, and significant numbers of farmers hopefully will join up into that scheme. So it is starting to move towards a redistribution, a reallocation of what is now a single pot of money. So the sort of concepts of Pillar 1, Pillar 2 are all gone.
Yeah. And second question is, obviously, Norman, that 9% cut initially, that'll come off the farmers for the beef scheme, but that'll also come off the sheep farmers, but there is no sheep scheme. So what's the thinking of the department in terms of introducing a sheep support scheme?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd say there's something in this programme for everyone. In terms of the sheep sector, at this time last year, we received a report from Sheep Task Force, Industry Task Force, but simply capacity, and absence of a minister, we couldn't really progress that. We now want to go back to that and actually look now and start from a very basic principle. What's the problem we're seeking to solve? What's the big issues that we need to address within the sheep sector? So we're not starting it from the premise of we have to come up with a way of justifying a headage payment for sheep. It's, what are the opportunities, what are the issues within the sheep sector, and then design measures that actually will address those issues in the best possible way. So that's something that we're starting to look at this year.
I think it's important because obviously if we're going to effectively modulate up to 18% of the new single farm payment effectively from sheep farmers, I think it's all farmers, I think it'd be important that there needs to be a support scheme looked at. But listen, I'm not going to hog a meeting, I'm going to go around the room. So first, John, you've asked first, yeah.
Chair, thank you. I'm going to say to everyone here today, good to see you again, and you're very welcome to the committee, as the Chair pointed out. I have a couple of questions which I'll take one by one, if that's okay. And I understand what we've opened with the farm funding issues, and it's right that we have some information and will be updated, I'm sure, on further questions as we go along. But I want to move, if I may, to where farming, food and rural affairs interface with the environment division of the department. And I'm sure you'll understand my reasons for raising the effects and after effects of what happened at Lough Neagh last year. So after having witnessed the ecological crisis that evolved there, with the effects stretching right through the Ban, other parts of the catchment, towns, villages and rural areas right around the Lough, community and business life and all of those places, and reaching eventually, as you'll know, the North Coast. Can I ask which, if any, policies in your respective business areas are being reviewed as a result of what's come to light with regard to pollution and the crisis that happened at Lough Neagh?
So, as I said, I mean, we're embarking into this new policy agenda, and environmental stewardship environmental sustainability is one of our 4 pillars within our overall goals. So it's productivity, now not production, stress not production, it's about efficiency of use of resource. So productivity is number 1, because as an industry you have to address that if you want to have a future. Doesn't need to be antagonistic to the environment. Secondly is that environmental sustainability. Third is resilience within the industry, and fourth is supply chain integration. So the environmental agenda is very much hardwired into this programme, and we will see, and we have to recognise that many of the environmental challenges we have can be tracked back to past agricultural issues, and therefore there's no point in dwelling on that. We have to move forward. And how is agriculture going to contribute to the solutions? And I think agriculture can absolutely contribute to the solutions. So certainly Farming with Nature programme will certainly have a role. Certainly our capital investment measure as well, to make sure that it is focused on both innovation and environmental outcomes. So in many farms there will be opportunities for capital investment that actually will deliver environmental benefit. And that's right across, not just water quality, but ammonia, carbon, biodiversity. All of those issues need to be addressed simultaneously, and we recognise that. And therefore that's why I say that over time we would hope that the Farming with Nature programme will be a very substantial core within this overall agenda going forward.
Okay, and before we come to the next question, which is more business related, and just to clarify this one, so whilst I understand the principles of the forthcoming or existing policies on environmental matters and taking those into consideration, I suppose more specifically, were there actually any existing policies or practices that were reviewed immediately as a result of what happened at Lough Neagh?
Yeah, I mean, that's all part of the review that will be published shortly. Say you have to look right across the whole piece. So it's, you look across all the levers of policy. So it's education, incentivisation, regulation, and they all have a part to play. Okay. So all of that is very much in play. Okay.
Thank you for that.
I think the one thing I would point to is probably the education thing is probably the bit that. And information is probably one of the key aspects of all of this.
Okay, Norman, thank you. Chair, the second question is on the rural business development programmes and initiatives. And I'm wondering if we could get a slightly bit more information on that, particularly with regard to what interagency working goes on there, and interdepartmental, Department for Communities, local councils with planning, for example, local development plans, if and where they exist with local councils. Is there a joined up approach to ensure that all of those issues are being addressed and all of the voices are being heard in relation to that?
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, that there is that joined up approach between governments or government departments. Teresa, you want to say a few words? Just I know that Teresa is very much engaged with, for example, Department of Communities, and making sure that as we move forward with our rural policy, it actually meshes and is actually in lockstep with what's happening in the broader agenda. Teresa?
Yeah, so, I'm working very much with Department of Communities. Some of the programmes, there's definitely synergies between what we're trying to do within the Department of Agriculture and Rural Affairs and what the Department of Communities is doing. So, but we're very much at that policy thinking stage. But we are definitely sharing knowledge, working collaboratively to work out that. We're also setting up a working meeting with the Department of Rural and Communities in the South as well, and we'll be looking at the other jurisdictions as well. But very much just trying to understand the landscape, understand what the problem is that we're all trying to fix, and making sure there's no duplication and that we're working together to solve the problem and have the right interventions.
Thank you, Teresa. I think you've at least partly and possibly totally answered my next question, which was, are there any frameworks in place to ensure that cohesive approach goes forward? So those are things that are also probably evolving, whether it would be a structure where communities, local councils, other departments are sitting in a working group or partnership to try and deliver better on all of these things, but that is something then that might be further down the line if it doesn't already exist. Is that right?
Yeah, there is actually the strategic collaboration framework that communities and the executive office lead, and we're at the table of that as well. And that's looking at how we provide funding to community sectors, or it's nearly into a place, you know, there's a couple of pilots going on. One in Auchnacloy is the rural pilot, and the other pilot is in the Diamond area in Derry City. And the report from those two pilots has sort of been due in March, but it's looking at, you know, what is the funding that's going into a place, and what is what does that look like for community having to deal with so many different parts of government. Yep. And looking to see if there's a framework that we could put in place to make that better, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And it's early days. It is it's pilot, and it's but it's, you know, the collaboration framework is what it's called. So.
Thank you.
Okay, John. Thank you, Anya.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming in this morning and briefing us. I suppose I just have one question around the rural development programme and going forward. And I suppose, obviously, being from a rural area myself and seeing the benefits of what previous funding has delivered to those communities, will the department take every opportunity to replace the rural development programme that was previously there, and possibly look at shared island funding to contribute towards that?
Yeah, I mean certainly that's what we wish to do now. So we had that. The rural policy framework was published in March 2022. It's quite high level, and we now actually need to flesh that out, drill down in it, and actually identify what are the key issues now we need to move forward on. But as Teresa said, it's important that we do that in collaboration where we can with other government departments, because in many cases they'll have much more resource than we will have. And we need to ensure that rural is adequately covered by programmes that are being developed, for example, by Department of Communities. So we want to ensure that there is that integration across the whole piece to make sure that the needs of rural areas are recognised across the board. So I think that's going to be a key issue for us in the months ahead.
Just, if you allow me, Chair, on the ammonia strategy piece at the minute, and obviously it's still very much up in the air, and as I understand is awaiting ministerial direction, but in terms of the equipment, the low emissions equipment, I think there's lease. Now I know you mightn't have the figures in front of you at the minute, but roughly how many farmers in the north have taken up that equipment?
So we can come back to you with that. I think you've got an assembly question on the number of lessee equipment items have been purchased, so we'll come back to you with that in writing. But it has been a significant proportion of the overall fund has gone towards that. Going forward on the ammonia strategy, I mean, effectively the outworkings of that then will include capital investment, and we will pick that up in terms of the focus of the future investment measure, again to ensure that integration across the department, so addressing the environmental challenges, be that ammonia, be that water, be that carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. It's the integration, and to make sure that the capital support measure is taking its lead from those other policy drivers.
Thank you, Norman. Thank you.
Just before I go across, Michelle, I just want to pick up just something there as well. You see there in relation to, Anya mentioned the rural development programme. Like, obviously in the past we would have our Priority 6, Farmer Access 3. In the case of Priority 6, we had an £80 million multi-annual budget there for groups that could plan ahead for a range of schemes around capital investment in their communities. And we also had a well-funded TRIPSI as well, which supported a lot of the rural micro grants, things like that there. Like, will we be able, what is the chances of trying to get back? I know that the Priority 6 was a EU fund, obviously. Can we get back to something resembling that there? And importantly, how will that grassroots community leader approach be replicated now in this post-Brexit era?
So again, I suppose that comes back to funding and what that might look like in the years ahead. And it's been some considerable time since we've had a multi-annual budget, as you know. Quite a lot of the rural interventions are now capital in nature. So again, different from EU funding in terms of what that looks like. I mean, you're not starting with a new a carryover baseline when you're talking about capital. So it is a very different funding landscape that we're looking at. So I think the important thing is to make sure that we have very clear understanding of what the needs are, what the policy measures are to address those needs, and then the funding falls on behind through the normal bidding process to make sure that we can actually put those in place. So I think that's, you don't start with the money, you start with the policy.
Yeah.
And it's really important that we get that right, and it is addressing need, and it is integrating with what's happening across the other departments.
Thank you, Norman. Michelle?
Thank you, and thanks for your presentation this morning. With the new minister in place, do you anticipate the timeline that you published last June still keeping to time?
So we have had discussions with the Minister, and the Minister's been clear that I mean, this is a good foundation to move on, to move forward, and so yeah, we will continue to build on that. The timeline, it's important as well, and we put that out last June so that farmers know what's coming, and so we will try to keep that as tightly as we can. Obviously there's been one or two areas where we've slipped a little bit by months. So, but it's really important that farmers have a line of sight as to what to expect over the next 2-3 years, and that's why we put it out there. I don't see that we'll be moving significantly away from that. The only caveat I would put around all of that is, of course, that will depend on resource, on having staff, and the outcome of the budget process, which is going to be very, very challenging. We all know that. But that's our ambition, is to keep to that timeline at this point.
And you're not anticipating a kickback in the same way as maybe your Welsh colleagues have had?
We've worked very hard to bring the industry with us on this journey. We've had a very close engagement with a stakeholder group comprising the main food, environment and farming representatives all in the room. Very open process. We've discussed warts and all, and it's been very, very productive in actually keeping the industry with us. Now I recognise that that's effectively within the leadership of the organisations, and actually now translating that out into the wider farming community is the next priority for us effectively. But we're pretty confident that everybody around that table is absolutely bought into the programme and what it's trying to achieve.
Okay, so just I suppose leading on from that, I suppose this is anecdotally, just in respect of the beef carbon reduction scheme. I was speaking to a beef man, and he was complaining that the price of prime beef being offered by the Northern Ireland factories had fallen in recent weeks, and this wasn't being experienced in the same way on the mainland or in the Irish Republic. And I suppose I'm told that there seems to be sort of a direct consequence of the beef carbon reduction scheme, that money's essentially being taken off the primary producers and effectively going to subsidise the meat plants in Northern Ireland. So was this considered as a potential consequence at the introduction of the scheme?
I'll say all of these things were very much discussed. We didn't hold back in any of our discussions around those issues. I think what the difference between the beef carbon reduction and what would have gone before pre-2005 when you had headage payments is they applied right across Europe, and they probably did have a market effect, whereas this is only applicable here, and therefore, but our product is being sold primarily into GB, so therefore the GB market should drive our market returns, and they should not be influenced by the beef carbon reduction scheme. But those conversations were had around the table, and in terms of that is not something that we would want the beef sector to actually defeat the purpose of the programme, and we had those conversations around the table.
And is there anything that can be done sort of retrospectively now with regards to that?
Well, I don't think you can look at short-term movements in the market and say draw conclusions from it. So we always know that the differential between prices here and GB does move all the time, and there always is a differential because we're remote from our market, so there always will be. That closes up and widens, all the time. So I don't think you can draw anything from a few weeks of movement in that particular relativity.
Just a couple of other issues, if you don't mind, Chair. You mentioned TRIPSI. Will there likely be a programme for this year for TRIPSI?
Yeah.
Yep. You don't take it.
Yeah, we we have put in a budget, a bid for TRIPSI. We are still committed to TRIPSI, but we have to now discuss with the Minister on what those policy areas will be within TRIPSI. And then we, subject to his approval and to budgets, then our intention is to launch initiatives under TRIPSI this year. Some are already committed and will carry forward, the ones that are under contract, and they will carry forward into future years. Some initiatives, there's a number of initiatives under TRIPSI. It's not just for a micro capital grant scheme. There's a number of other things, and some of them are coming to the end of the contract. We're reviewing contracts for another 3 years. Some have finished and they're being evaluated, and some then we're coming up with, we're a micro capital grant scheme, considering the evaluation, deciding, how the scheme will run going forward, and subject to approval, discussions with Minister. And the Minister, talked to him yesterday. He is keen to move this forward, and we're meeting him later in the week as well. So this is very top priority at the minute to
It's a really important scheme to get out to rural communities and different groups where we couldn't access maybe some of the bigger European monies at the time. And just
I think it comes back to the earlier point I was making, that we want to ensure coherence. So we have a TRIPSI programme. We've got a rural policy framework. It's now starting to bring all of that converge at all, so that you don't have separate elements. It's all working to a common strategic agenda. It's important that you do that.
And just finally, Chair, if you'll indulge me, it would be remiss of me. One of the last times I met Norman, we were up to our knees in muck in a field in Cumber. Post the flooding in the autumn, and obviously we saw the devastation for potato growers, and I suppose it's really disappointed, and I've written to the Minister in respect of this, and hopefully getting a meeting with him soon, but disappointed that there hasn't been a scheme to assist those growers, and I suppose it's really trying to understand the rationale how a business case which essentially came from the same incident, can be passed via the Department of Economy and not through yourselves.
Yeah, so in terms of weather-related events, that's been our invariable experience over the last 20-odd years, is that it is very difficult to actually get a business case to stack up in value for money terms, in terms of what it actually will add to the economy. And that's why invariably past weather aid events have always been operating under ministerial direction. So the economics just doesn't stack up, I'm afraid. So that's how we ended up where we are. And I do know you're coming in to see the Minister, I think maybe next week or something, on this. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of the business case that was done elsewhere, but certainly for us, it simply didn't stack up. But that wasn't a surprise, I have to say, because that's been our experience of every other weather event. It's always been
disappointing. Never the case.
Okay, thanks for that. I just want to back up, Michelle, on the TRIPSI. I've always said that if there's ever an example of a relatively little amount of money going a long way, that's a really good example of it. And am I correct in saying that when I was looking at the 2023-24 budget, it was like 1.4 million? Is that figure correct?
23-24. Yeah, the resource. Yeah,
that was the resource side. What was their capital side?
And on average, on average. Our annual budget for TRIPSI would have been about 6 million,
yes,
give or take.
Yes.
there was less spent last year. And I know you have a question in as well, and
Yes,
we're
indeed.
preparing the answer to that as well. There was spent last year, but that was not intentional, if you know what I mean. It was just the fact that certain capital schemes came to an end and they needed evaluated, and just resource pressures, etc. And also because of the 1 year budget, it doesn't help. So we are now, completed that evaluation, and we're now going to meet, as I said, meeting with the Minister now in the coming days to consider the options for going forward, and hopefully we'll have an announcement soon with regard to the incoming financial year. So, there is still a bid for TRIPSI in. I would say that we are also reviewing TRIPSI, the TRIPSI framework that's been in place since 2016, and we're going to do a review this year, commencing in April, hopefully with a report in December, just to evaluate how well it's done and met against it, the objectives that were set out initially.
Oh, it's
So
just
that's-
a good program, and even during the lockdown period and all, we've seen that we really brought home how important it was, and the capital investment. There's a lot of trim trails and all that were done as the capital end, and was again they mean so much to local communities. So, Nicola.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Norman, Teresa and Alison, for your presentation today. I just want to pick up on the Chair's initial comments about the communication around the transition from the basic payment scheme to the new farm sustainability payment. I think it is really key that we get good information out to farmers. Norman very kindly did come to West Rome very recently and provide an update for rural farmers there. And that was really, really helpful. But I suppose it exposed to me then the challenges for farmers as well, and getting their head around the complexities that's involved here. 'Cause many of our farmers are part-time farmers, they're working other jobs, and I suppose the farming part of it is a bit of a labour of love for them. It's not for all the money that's in it, but it's the fact that they just love it. But obviously the likes of the basic payment beforehand was just so important to them to actually make the farm sustainable. So I do think that their communication piece is really, really important. So just kind of wanted to flag that up as well, Declan. Moving on to a question, I know one of your priorities is around the sustainability and the strength and improving the agri-food sector, and obviously that basic payment scheme and the changes there feeds into that, and the issues around it. But there are a number of other issues as well that challenges that farmers are facing in regards to that, including the post-Brexit trade deals and how they could have a detrimental impact on the agri-food sector. There's been plenty of discussion recently about the access to labour market as well, and how that will affect the food sector, and then changes to policy because of Brexit. And obviously another massive one is climate change, and we've seen in the last number of years just the change in our weather systems and the number of storms we've been having, and how that then affects farming. Also the war in Ukraine and the effect that's had on farmers and due to costs. So can you tell me what kind of impact do you think this is having on farmers, the challenges they're facing, and what the department's doing to mitigate against that, please?
Yeah, I mean, you've probably highlighted, a number of the big strategic things that are external to the industry, and there's nothing we can do about those. And that's part of why we've put one of our 4 strategic pillars is building resilience within the industry. It's so important because we know there's a crisis coming. Don't know what it is yet, but there's a crisis coming. That's the nature, that's the history of agriculture, and therefore part of it is actually the farm sustainability payment is a safety net payment. That's the justification for it being there. But we also want farmers to build into their own business planning and their own business thinking resilience. How do I withstand shocks that are inevitably coming, and build that into business planning processes and preparing for the rainy day that is coming. We know that, and therefore being much more proactive about that. So I think there's a lot in there around that whole resilience bit, and a lot of that comes down to as well the new knowledge and innovation programs that we will be bringing forward as well. So not only communicating to farmers what the schemes are about, but it's more fundamentally what they're seeking to achieve in terms of better environmental performance, better productivity, efficiency, resilience. I mean, those are the fundamentals that the training and knowledge and the innovation will seek to drive. So I mean I suppose that's at the core of the programme. We know those big external shocks will continue to hit us, and we need to be prepared as an industry to weather that. And the one thing I would say is, we're not holding back any of the budget in any given year, just in case. So effectively the budget will be deployed, and there's not anywhere else to go to say, there's a crisis, let's go and look for some more money. The chances of that probably are fairly slim. So therefore, it's doing the best with what we have and making sure that risk is properly hardwired into business plans and businesses.
Do you think realistically is that for part-time farmers, which I just kind of referenced there, is it? Are they able to build that into their kind of business model whenever? It seems quite detailed. It might be okay for full-time farmers on big farms with lots of cattle or whatever it is, but more difficult maybe for the smaller kind of farmer.
It's probably actually the other way around. Okay. You tend to find that the more resilient farmer is the part-time farmer because you have an alternative source of income, which is more stable. Whereas for the full-time farmer, the only income you have is what you generate off your farm, and therefore that can be very, very volatile from year to year. So in some ways, they're the more vulnerable farmers, certainly more vulnerable to risk, and therefore critical that they really do think about risk management. Whereas part-time, you got a bit more of a buffer to weather the hard times because you have an alternative source of income.
That's a fair point. Thank you for that, Norman. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Going to move across to County Armagh now, to William.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In relation to the proposed schemes of beef, which is already in place, the carbon reduction scheme in beef, and the issue of earlier slaughter dates over the next number of years, and a proposed scheme for suckler cows for earlier calving and closer calving intervals. The dairy sector is a large sector. Is there any anticipation of some help to reduce carbon in it, the dairy sector?
So we think that we'd like to see similar trends within the dairy sector. So again, reducing age at first calving. Certainly we want to drive that. Reducing replacement rates as well within the dairy sector because they can be very high and it's a high cost for the business. But those are things that we think we can take through largely through the technology and advisory programme. And we're already, you've already seen significant movement within the dairy sector in terms of reducing age at first calving. That's already happening, whereas we're not really seeing that in the beef sector. So the drive towards efficiency is actually driving towards reduced age at first calving. We are seeing that, and therefore, how do we encourage and support that through advisory and packages to actually encourage that along its way?
There needs to be more encouragement in relation to that. The dairy sector would be a big contributor to carbon, I would have thought.
Well, all ruminant sectors contribute to the carbon. I mean, the biggest single greenhouse gas for agriculture is methane. And that it comes from the ruminant sector, so primarily the bovines. So that's our biggest challenge in moving forward, is to actually get that down, and there are technologies that can actually help us do that.
The chairman did mention the sheep sector also, but there is concern in that sector that there seems to be some encouragement and support for all sectors and none for them, so I think it is something that we need looked at.
Goes back to the point I made, let's identify what the issues are, what the challenges, what the opportunities are, and develop measures to address that, rather than coming at it from the perspective, let's come up with a headage payment. Let's actually address the challenge.
I'll accept that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, William. And Anya, you're looking back in.
Yeah, I am. It's just off the back of some of Michelle's comments there and Nicola's around food security. A few of us met with the Mushroom Growers Association a number of months ago, and I know it was also raised in the debate the other day in the Chamber around the fishing industry and the workforce issues that both those sectors are currently facing. And I know from the Mushroom Growers Association, they're actually losing workers are moving down south to work, less red tape with visas, And I'm just wondering, has the department raised this or addressed this with the Home Office?
Many times, and indeed the Minister is currently writing again to the Home Office Secretary of State, really to again stress the challenges, particularly the recent challenges, and the changes that are just about to come in from 1st of April in terms of the skilled visa, raising the threshold salary there. So these are significant concerns. Absolutely, and yes, mushroom sector has been struggling in particular. The seasonal worker scheme hasn't really worked for that sector, and the salary thresholds are simply too high for that sector. So it is one that's struggling. Fisheries as well, and I think the raised salary thresholds in the fisheries sector will really challenge that sector as well. So these points are being made to the Home Office. Have been made repeatedly in the past, but the Minister is currently writing again to raise those issues and those concerns.
Okay, folks, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Teresa, Norman and Alison for coming here this morning. Very detailed presentation, and I think it was a good range of questions, and certainly I know we'll be seeing loads of you over the next time ahead, and we look forward to it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Please join us again.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks, Rob.
Toilet? You can go to the toilet.
You can now, anyway.
We hand out.
Yes, we have enough. We have enough people.
Folks, we're just going to go out of public session here for a moment, just going to go out of public session here for a wee moment for a quick comfort break. You push the button now.
Committee Room 21. Sound. 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 Committee Room 21. Sound.
Yeah. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 5, and I should note that we've received apologies through William here for Buchanan. We can't make it with us today. Note that, Mark. Yeah. Okay, members, we're moving on to agenda item 5 now. It's a briefing from the AERO officials, the Veterinary Service and Animal Health Group. I would like to welcome the officials from the Veterinary Service and Animal Health. We're very delighted to have a good few of you here with us today, and I understand that some of you will remain in the public gallery, and then if there's questions, you'll come forward. So I'd like to welcome Robert Huey, Chief Veterinary Officer, Neil Gartland, Director of Animal Health and Welfare Policy, and Ms. Gemma Daly, the Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer, Enzootic Disease Control and Field Delivery. And then I think then after that we'll have Brian Dooher, the Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer, Manager Framework SPS Delivery, Group Renewal and Business Management, Ms. Patricia Quinn Duffy, Director of Veterinary Medicines and EU Reporting, Mr. David Kyle, Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer, Epizootic Disease Control and Public Health Delivery. And they'll be coming to the table as well. Okay, member, for this item I want to refer you to pages 60 to 100 in your pack. The DAERA First Day Brief, and to pages 101 to 126 DAERA Key Challenges. And following the briefing, I'll open up the session to questions. So, Robert and Neil and Gemma, I'd like maybe for you to kick off your briefing, and then we'll maybe have questions afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the day. It's quite like old times.
Having
you back at the head of the table.
Like old times, right?
Have you stated I'm Robert Huey, Chief Veterinary Officer of Northern Ireland, at least until 9th of April, as my retirement date looms ahead of me. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate you on all of your roles and wish the committee members well in the time ahead. Only a short time ahead of us to do a lot of work. We look forward to working with you. I'm pleased to be here with you this morning to provide an overview of the work of Veterinary Service and Animal Health Group. And as you said, I'm joined by Neil, Director of Animal Health and Welfare Policy, and by Gemma, Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer. David Kyle and Patricia Quinn Duffy are to the side and will come in as we need them to help me answer some of the questions. Brian is with us today, Brian Duker, Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer. He's taken a well-deserved week off. You're probably very glad to hear that, Mr. Chairman, given what's coming up at the weekend. Veterinary Service, as you know, Animal Health Group is responsible for the development of animal health and welfare policy for both farmed and non-farmed animals, and the implementation of that policy in respect of farm animals. My group is also responsible for policy development and implementation in respect of food animal identification, imports of livestock products and animal feed into Northern Ireland, complicated over the recent years by first the EU exit, Northern Ireland Protocol, Windsor Framework, and now by Command Paper. And we work with DEFRA on the export of animals and animal products internationally. Colleagues within Veterinary Service support the wider DAERA family and the Food Standards Agency through implementation, delivery and the enforcement of veterinary public health controls and agri-food legislation relating to feed and food safety, product certification, marketing standards, labelling, classification and price reporting. So a very broad range of responsibilities for one group, overseeing policy development, implementation, operational delivery, trade facilitation and undertaking the duties of the competent authority. Delivering all this, however, is not without its challenges. Of primary concern to me, similar to other CVOs across the UK, is the issue of veterinary resource. While I have around 140 vets, I need at least 50 more to have what I would consider a full complement. However, budget cuts have meant vacancies have been removed, and public sector pay in comparison with vets which could earn either in private sector or in government in Ireland present ongoing challenges for recruitment and retention. And just as a personal observation on this, Chair, when I joined the Department of Agriculture, I got a 20 to 30% pay increase for becoming a civil servant. Now I'm expecting vets joining us from private practice to take a pay cut. The other issue is that in my day, there's a phrase, the conditions in practice were really different from those in the department. With private practitioners not in general in small animals doing their own evening work, and with better provision of CPD and better working conditions, the conditions actually of employment between the private sector and government service are not as wide as that gap used to be. So we're paying them less for much the same terms and conditions. Indeed, budgetary constraints across the NICS have meant that we've had to do more with less. It's perhaps useful to put some figures to this to aid the committee's understanding of the position. My group currently has 654 full-time equivalent staff, but I've got 106 vacancies on top of 80 posts that were lost this year in savings. This is at a time when the list of key areas requiring new policy, legislation or operational delivery never seems to shrink, only ever expand. This is coupled with ongoing pressure on our budget, not least as a result of increasing rates of TB, bovine TB, and spend on the compensation element of our TB eradication programme. The cost to government of delivering the bovine TB programme in Northern Ireland has increased significantly over the last number of years. In the last 5 years, the average annual cost of delivering the programme has risen from 38.4 million to a record 53 million last year, 22-23, with compensation accounting for just 38 million of this amount. And if you set that 53 million that we spend within government on TB against my total budget of 74 million, you can see that it's the most significant thing that we do, at least in terms of monetary spend. This is the main challenge facing the group, but there are numerous others. And so we are delighted to now have a new minister to start dealing with these issues as they have arisen. Minister Muir has committed to address the unsustainable levels of TB. He has spoken of his determination to engage with stakeholders to seek options of how we advance the TB programme and TB strategy, including options on the way forward for any wildlife intervention. The Minister has outlined already that tackling this disease and all the factors which contribute to its spread and endurance will be a top priority for him in his new role. We will also be engaging with the Minister on what reforms he wishes to progress in the areas of animal welfare. He has stated that this will be a key priority for him, and officials in BSAHG will be presenting future policy options for animal welfare, including Lucy's Law, that's third-party pet sales, licensing of animal boarding, and of course XL bullies. The group in the time ahead will also advance with our obligations under the Windsor Framework, ensuring appropriate implementation of our legal obligations at Northern Ireland's point of entries, just again to try and put some colour in that, in the last year there was 140,000 consignments came through our points of entry requiring checks. That's 140,000 documentary checks to be carried out. So it gives you an idea of the volume of what a remarkably small team of people have done over the last year or two. And great credit to Brian Ducher, Deputy Chief, for the work that he's done there. Following publication of the Windsor Framework, which established 2 ways of goods to move from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, goods that are at risk of moving to the EU single market and goods that are destined for final consumption in Northern Ireland, we initiated a Northern Ireland Windsor Framework programme to ensure provisions set out in the official controls regulations, the EU regulations that govern this, and the EU SPS regulations are being delivered. Working closely with the UK Government colleagues, we have successfully implemented the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme and the Northern Ireland Plant Health Label Scheme. The next phase of the programme involves refinement and enhancement of these schemes, and we continue to work on DEFRA teams on defining the operational policy and legislation needs required to introduce a Northern Ireland Pet Movement Scheme, the SPS post and parcels regime, and these have to be put in place this year. And we also have plans to introduce a charging regime for Northern Ireland. Also, these are in the early stages of discovery. With respect to veterinary medicines, which I know will be of interest to the members, and where the Minister will shortly be meeting key stakeholders, we currently have a grace period until December 2025 to comply with new requirements under the Windsor Framework. There remains ongoing negotiations between UK Government and the EU. The decisions reached or not reached could have a significant impact on animal health and welfare and potentially on Northern Ireland's ability to trade. Veterinary Service Animal Health Group will also continue to work closely with the Veterinary Medicines Agency, which is an agency of DEFRA, and have initiated a scoping exercise with the application of the legislation and issues facing veterinary medicines in Northern Ireland. And this will inform contingency planning and compliance. And Patricia joined my team to head up a division last October, with this being her main, if not her only, function, is to scope this work and to take the work on veterinary medicines and the wider veterinary medicines policy, strategy, legislation and implementation forward. Over the next year, we will continue with our extensive animal disease surveillance and preparedness for incursions of disease. And some of these are very close to us, including African swine fever spreading across Europe, and particularly blue tongue. Around 116 cases in GB in the counties Kent and Norfolk since September of last year. A key achievement of the group in the past years has been our work with the industry to preserve our biosecurity and to avoid significant incursion of avian influenza. And again, the disease hasn't gone away. There was a case in Yorkshire about 2 weeks ago of the high pathogenic avian influenza. This worrying zoonotic disease remains ever present in our wild bird population. However, the UK was able to announce zonal freedom for Northern Ireland in March 23, whilst the rest of the UK remained affected. Vigilance for disease outbreaks forms a key element of our UK biological security strategy. One strand of this One Health approach is the ongoing work on antimicrobial resistance, which my group coordinates across DAERA. Together with the Department of Health, DAERA is currently developing an implementation plan for the next phase of the UK National Action Plan for AMR, which will address the need for better guardianship of medicines and other chemicals, which are used to protect both animal and human health. Also with the Department of Health, we will continue to work with the Government in Dublin on their One Health Commission, so that this global challenge can be dealt with on an all-island basis. Further, we will continue to work with the wider agri-food industry advancing trade facilitation. This includes working with DEFRA to highlight local priorities for market access as they progress trading relationships with third countries. My group also continues to support facilitation of third country inward missions with the Food Standards Agency, providing assurance on our animal health and food chain security for existing and emerging markets. On all of this, as outlined, we will work closely with our new Minister and continue to engage with all of our stakeholders as our Minister decides on his key priorities for the remainder of this mandate. Thank you for your attention, Committee, and we're of course happy to take questions.
Thank you, Robert, for a very wide-ranging report, and we really appreciate that there. There's just a couple of points, Robert, before maybe pass around the room. Probably most the first thing I want to mention is the TB. Obviously, this is a very, very topical issue for farmers, and I co-hosted an event here with the Farmers Union on the start of the week there, the NI Farming Day, and members all attended. And this is one of the big issues that, what they're saying is, the devastating impact of it as well. And also from an animal health point of view, you'll know that over 18,000 cattle had to be culled last year as a consequence of TB. So it's a serious animal welfare issue as well. So effectively, where are we at in terms of our TB strategy? I'm conscious that our rates are twice that of the south, for example, we share the same landmass. So where are we at with that, Robert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And of course, I started with it in my presentation because it is our biggest issue. Yeah. And it's not just the public money, but as you say, the pressures on farm families. And to be perfectly frank and honest about it, the total waste, the waste of genetics, and the waste of perfectly good cattle that should be going into the food chain as clean cattle rather than as reactors. I'll bring in Neil and Gemma in a moment. But as far as strategies and policy is concerned, under the former Minister McElveen, who's here, we launched in 2016 our strategy, a strategy that we had taken 3 or 4 years to consider, and which I still consider to be comprehensive and to have all the issues that we need to deal with in order to get on top of the disease. But it's important that we get away, as it said in Chapter 1 of that strategy, that we get away from this being a government disease. This is a disease that we can only properly bear down on if everybody's playing on the same team and kicking the ball in the same direction. And it's not always so. And that is one of my great regrets, is that we have not managed to take forward that strategy. Former Minister Putz then took that strategy, refined it, came forward with his own thoughts, and as you know, we were stopped midstream with that, with the JR fining against us. So we're now in a place where it's for Minister Muir to consider where he wants to go for next. And of course, we've been talking to him extensively already on this, and I know that, as I said, it's one of his key priorities. So I'll pass over to Neil to do a little bit more on strategy and policy, and then to Gemma to say something practical about what's on the ground, how it's affecting people on the ground.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Chair. No, as Robert's outlined, there are a number of steps will be taken over the months and the year ahead, engaging with the Minister and his key priorities for the strategy, working with industry on the elements of the strategy that we can progress, acknowledging that the wildlife intervention proposal is not proceeding because of the judicial review, and bringing forward to the Minister new proposals for potential wildlife intervention for him to decide if he feels that one should move forward and what that form that should take. He outlined in the Assembly he's committed to dealing with all of the factors of disease spread, and that is something that we're engaging with him on quite extensively. We're also advancing the TBEP review, so we're independent advisory body to the Department, the next steps for that, and other things like alternative control herds review for Minister's consideration, and seeking again to once again increase our gamma use within the field. We had to reduce that back because of budget cuts in the last year, but seeking to ramp that back up again in the next year. So quite a lot of work around the strategy moving forward over the next year, but acknowledging that we want to be further ahead than what we're at the minute.
But Mr. Chair, we can only really make progress in this if we look at the problem of TB holistically. There is no point in looking at one thing without looking at the other. We have to look at the whole thing going forward. And then we have to consider how this is going to be paid for. We can't just bury our head in the sand. And these were all things that were in the 2016 strategy. There are 6 chapters. There's 4 of them everybody agrees to, and there's 2 of them about which no one seems to be able to agree. But until we take the whole thing forward in a coherent manner, and people are happy to recognise that we've got a common problem here, which is bovine TB sitting at 9.7%, just below 10. I wouldn't take that as being a great achievement. But there's a real need for a coherent move forward on this, with everybody pushing in the same direction. Gemma, is there anything you want to add?
We should say, obviously, we have our surveillance programme in place, between our testing regime as well as our surveillance in our meat plants for animals coming through and picking up any lesions at slaughter. And we're carrying out those programmes as we have been for a number of years, but we fully recognise the field of limitation. Again, this is repeating, doing the same stuff over and over again, and TB levels rising. As Robert's already mentioned, the veterinary resource issue, and we found that across our field delivery, our vet numbers are down, and our issue of trying to get replacements and more vets in there. So that has limited the ability of vets in our field offices to work as one-to-one as they'd like with the herd keepers, particularly when TB levels are so high. And that's, the vets don't appreciate that either. They would like to be doing the deep epidemiological investigations, but they're just TB levels so high and vet numbers so low. So that's a challenge for ourselves as well.
That's worth putting a little colour on, Chair. When I was a field VO, I looked after between 5 and 10 breakdowns. I'm now asking a single vet to look after up on 100 breakdowns, look after 100 farmers. You can't get out on a farm. You can't get to know the farm family. You can't get to give bespoke advice on what suggestions as to what the best way forward is. You can't get into the details of lateral check tests and which neighbours are truly at risk and which ones aren't. You know, we do send our grip staff out to do investigations on farm, but it's not the job we'd be liking to do, which is why I started with staff and the problem that causes. Now, to be fair, we're doing a remarkable job with what we've got, but it feels like trying to hold the water back rather than stepping forward and getting this disease at least on the run, if not properly moving towards eradication.
Thank you. I'm sure that may be picked up again, but Robert, the one other thing I want to do mention before we move on around the room, and it's on the topic of animal welfare. I'm aware that in August last year the department cut 1.25 million for the animal welfare fund to local councils, which obviously has had an impact on the work of the local animal welfare officers. Obviously that probably wouldn't have been your decision, but do you feel that has had an impact on animal welfare standards in local areas in terms of impeding or not the councils to carry out their function in animal welfare?
Yeah. Well, obviously it has had an impact. You don't take 1.2 million pounds out of people's budget without having an impact. But it was done at a time when we were trying to balance a budget within the department, and where we were making, for example, very difficult decisions on TB and reducing some of the surveillance that we would normally do. So it was made under very difficult circumstances where you were looking around to see what isn't it absolutely statutory that you don't have to do. There was no legal basis for the payment of this money under my understanding, and the decision was made that it was something that had to be cut. It wasn't done with an easy mind. Now since then, the Minister has been looking at that, and I'll pass over to Neil to see if he has anything else to add. Sorry, I should get and warn you.
You're okay. No, Robert. We'll be engaging the Minister on that topic, Declan. Obviously, from the department's perspective, it was a very difficult decision we had to make in the face of budgetary pressures. We had to focus on our own statutory obligations, and councils are statutorily obliged to deliver this service, under the Welfare of Animals Act. It would be inappropriate to say much more than that. The councils have taken litigation against the department, and there's a pending judicial review hearing on that, so I wouldn't want to say much more, but that will be the current position, just to reiterate what Robert has said.
Well, have you made a budget bid to restore that in the incoming year?
I think as far as we can go is that the Minister's considering it.
Okay, thank you. I'll move around the room. Michelle.
Okay, thank you, and good to see you again. I suppose needless really to say that it's hugely disappointing that we haven't had further progress on the TB strategy since 2016, and certainly it was one of the issues which troubled me the most, and I still hear obviously sort of accounts from various farmers about the devastation that it does have on their livelihoods. But the consultation is out now to reduce the compensations paid to farmers, and they are rightly frustrated in relation to this, particularly as the on-farm costs outweigh the costs of the compensation that's already being paid. And I suppose further frustrated by the fact that there hasn't been any intervention with regards to wildlife. This was a consultation which was obviously directed by the Secretary of State as primarily revenue raising. With the resumption of the Assembly, and I know obviously you'll have discussions with the Minister, and obviously the consultation is still progressing. But what is the status of the consultation, and are we in a situation where it is a fait accompli?
I don't think that's the position. Michelle, thank you for the question. The Minister's outlined in the Assembly last week in oral question time that he couldn't commit not to consider the responses to that consultation. It is a live consultation and closes at the start of March. He has clearly identified, he understands the impact that disease has on farm businesses and the devastating impact of such, and the economical impact across the board, but also the economic impact on the department and the unsustainability of the programme and the cost of the programme, both to the department and farmers. So he's indicated clearly in the Assembly last week that he will take into consideration the consultation responses before he would take any decision on a way forward, but is looking at this in the round of the unsustainable cost of the programme of both to government, and acknowledging as well that to the farmers as well.
Sort of on similar vein, I suppose we're talking about disease, on-farm disease. With regards to BVD, obviously this is still prevalent, and I just wanted to know when we will actually get to the stage of having BVD free status. Obviously if we don't have that, we will be at a disadvantage from a trade perspective. And at what point will the department itself actually look to enforcing compulsory removal of infected animals?
I'm very pleased, as reported in the press over the weekend, the BVD, persistent infected animals, retained on farm at an all-time low, which is very encouraging because it shows that farmers are playing their part in the eradication of this disease, and of course it's a farmer-led initiative. On the legislation, Neil?
So we consulted last year on herd restrictions for the BVD programme. It was a big call from Animal Health and Welfare Northern Ireland and wider industry, and one that we were keen to support. We are looking to draft the necessary legislation to bring that into force, obviously subject to ministerial views and the Minister's permission to do that. We are seeking an external drafter just because of limited legal resource at the minute. It's quite stretched, so we're seeking a legal drafter, and once we go through the necessary approvals, specifically for BVD legislation, the two ESRs we're trying to draft are quite complex just with how the original order was made. We anticipate, pending ministerial agreement, that we would lay that in or around autumn. After that, we want to seek to work with industry, the BVD implementation group and IWINI on what the stage we're determining to be a stage 3 of the programme. So we know that there are things like neighbourhood notification and herd statuses that they're looking at, and we would consider that only really at that time could we really realistically look at what a date could be for eradication. We know there is pressure given the fact that the ROI have sought approval for the programme from the ROI and are looking quite quickly from the EU for disease-free status. So until we go to that stage 3 ourselves in Northern Ireland, I wouldn't want to put a figure in terms of the date, but certainly we are conscious of the efforts that we need to take over the time ahead. Herd restrictions is the first step, and then we want to engage with industry on that stage 3. We've made really good progress, as Robert has said. We want to keep the foot on the wheel or foot on the gas around this and try and move it forward further. So,
yeah, but there's also recognition that the BVD eradication programme will go through its various stages, and government role is really at this last stage to ensure that it's a level playing field for everyone. So this is when you get to the stage in the scheme where you're almost there, but there's a reticent few at the end, where in order to ensure that there's a level playing field for farmers, that you're coming in and making sure that you're doing everything you can. So not being able to move these animals off farm, the farm restrictions, will be part of a suite of things, as Neil has said, that you bring in at the end of a programme to get from very low to zero.
And Robert, you led with the issues that you're having with your veterinary team, and actually I had a series of questions listed because I kind of nearly anticipated that would become an issue, and I suppose again disappointing to hear that you have so many vacancies and the challenges that you're having actually then recruiting staff. Has the department considered revisiting a remuneration scheme in order to attract staff into the department, and also obviously conscious of the responsibilities that you now have with regards to manning posts and so on, and if you gave me an idea of the number of staff that you're required to have at those posts and the vacancies that are associated with that in order to be able to do the work that you're mandated to do.
When I said around 50 vets down, it's actually 47. I know these figures somewhat well. Your question about remuneration is of course a complex one, and I have a programme that we're taking forward. We're calling it a renewal programme, in which vets' terms and conditions and pay are being looked at. Now, the first step of that was actually the grading of the veterinary posts, and we're in the middle of a grading programme of the veterinary inspector, veterinary officer, in fact all the veterinary posts below senior civil service. So there's a JEGS programme going through all my vets to make sure that people are at the right grade and getting paid the right money for the job. And that, I hope, will report early. Well, we're expecting it in the next few days, if not weeks, if not few days. So once that's done and we're certain what we're dealing with, then we have another suite of ideas and proposals to take forward. That does include bonuses for being a vet, basically, and other addressing other issues that we think will be attractive to bring people in. And let's face this and retain people within the department. Very, very roughly, I start my vets in around 40,000. They start in the south at over €60,000 now, which even you take into consideration the cost of living in the Republic of Ireland and the exchange rate. The economists did a bit of work for me on this about 2 years ago, and there's about 4,000 of spending money and difference between what you get for going to work in Dundalk or going to work in Uri. And it's as blunt as that. It's not just the starting pay. DAFM have a system where a veterinary officer can join and without promotion can raise in their salary to over €100,000 without promotion, where my veterinary officers join at 40 and they might get to 47. So when you look at the two sets of terms and conditions, they're completely different. Now, people still want to come and work for me. We still are getting vets coming, and so we must be doing something right. But it is a broader issue. Our position is more difficult than most because of the pay issue here, as I've just outlined. But there is a deficiency of veterinary resource right across Europe. This is common everywhere, except in Ireland. It's the only place where they seem to be able to attract enough vets. And surveys show that the happiest vets in Europe are in Ireland and Switzerland, the two happiest vets. But there's a supply issue. And it's not just numbers of vets coming through veterinary college. It's people continuing and maintaining a veterinary career. And it's people just giving up veterinary after a few years and going doing something else. And it happens in practice and it happens to us. So there's a Europe-wide problem with supply of vets. We had a SIB, the Strategic Investment Board, had a look at would a veterinary school in Northern Ireland make the difference to the number of vets that we retain in Northern Ireland, and their conclusion was that it was not definitively one way or the other, that if you had a veterinary school we couldn't guarantee that those vets would stay in Northern Ireland, and that there were other ways of doing it, is what they said. In my view, we probably asked them the wrong question. My view on a veterinary school is that it's a centre of excellence that lifts all ships, and that a veterinary school attracts world-leading minds in Northern Ireland, retains world-leading minds in Northern Ireland, and on its research and development programme alone could be justified. But that's an argument for another day. But there's a supply issue. We have a specific pay and conditions problems, which is common across the civil service, and we have a retention problem because of the conditions elsewhere in this island. So it's complex, it's like all these things. But we have a programme in place to address this once we get the bugbear of grading out of the way. That's a very long question to a very sensible question. Sorry.
I was asking then specifically just in relation to the manning of posts and the number of staff that was required, and obviously the cost then associated with that too.
Well, I lost some of the posts that we had, but I have money for another 12 posts, I think is the number. I'd like 47 more, but I have money for 12 if I could get 12 more in. The others were wiped out when we were wiping out vacancies. But there is money for another 12 posts. And we're having to look at other ways to employ staff. We've looked at agencies, which is something I don't really like, bringing people in on a part-time basis to work alongside their permanent colleagues. But it's something we've had to do to maintain the essential services, particularly in our meat plants, which David has done sterling work on, to bring in agency staff. Because, of course, it's a double whammy of when you don't have enough staff is the staff that you do have are then under much more pressure to deliver as much as they possibly can, and you're losing a bit of the thinking time and all the things that you'd like to do if you had enough staff. But we are where we are. It's not going to be turned around in a year or two, but we have been looking at long term, and we've also been looking through the agencies at shorter term solutions in order to keep us all upright.
Maybe just specifically in relation to the posts at the ports.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me some more information about that? And obviously, what you estimate to be the number of checks, and then vis-a-vis the number of posts that will be required in order to be able to fulfil those checks?
From day one, we never had enough staff to carry out the checks that we needed. And the instructions that I had given to staff is that we are on a pathway towards full compliance with the requirements of the European Union, and what we do, we'll do well. Don't be doing checks half. Do checks properly, the ones that you do. And as I said at the beginning, the 140,000 documentary checks is a testament to that. We still don't have enough staff to do all the work we have. I'll write to you on the exact numbers because I just don't have them in my head at the moment. But something like another half dozen vets in the ports would make all the difference. We're not far away. It's a few that we need. And that's where people have been going as they join us generally. But it's not just vets that we need. It's also the inspectors. There's a particular problem with plant inspectors at the moment. And we also had a problem with stevedores, which are the guys, the industrials, who actually drive the forklift trucks and get boxes off lorries for the inspectors. And strangely enough, we had difficulties employing stevedores. I suppose it's just the employment market out there. You'd think that working in a port on government terms and conditions would be more attractive than a building site, but apparently it's not, because we have difficulties getting those sorts of manual labourers. So there's a requirement for a whole range of staff, and I'd prefer, rather than give you estimates, to get you the right figures, and I'll write through the chair on those issues.
William?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you're very welcome to the committee. In relation to, I have one particular constituent that bought a cow in Scotland, and because of restrictions in Blue Tongue, he's going to have to keep that animal there. Possibly, he's told 6 months. He's already bought it 6 weeks ago. I suspect that Blue Tongue's hundreds of miles away from where his animal is in Scotland. Is it who makes the decision that isn't that regionalised? Isn't that an issue? Why is the whole of the UK? It was only Blue Tongue in one area that's hundreds of miles away from this cow. Why is he restricted?
Just to give you an idea of the controls that you put in place for Blue Tongue, because of course, as you'll be aware, it's spread by midges. In all likelihood, it blew over initially into Kent and then into Norfolk in September, October of last year, and was there until it was first discovered in November in Kent. And since they've been looking within the zones around those premises is where the other 116 have been found. But none of us are under any illusion that it isn't in all likelihood in other places. There's been some surveillance carried out in the rest of Great Britain and none found. But the likelihood is that the disease has spread beyond the control zones. Now, to give you an idea of how far it can spread, you'll know that the protection zone for even influenza and for other diseases is 3 and then 10 kilometres. The surveillance zone for Blue Tongue is 150 kilometres, 100 miles. So you're within risk if you're within 100 miles. Now, that takes you to the Welsh border and it takes you fairly well up the country. It doesn't take you to Scotland, which is the point that you're making. But the true position at the moment is that we know it's in GB, but we don't know where all it is. And I have never yet served under a minister who, when we haven't had a disease in GB, has instructed me to ensure it doesn't get into Northern Ireland. And working on an island of Ireland basis, that's my priority, is to make sure this disease doesn't come back there. Now, the decisions haven't been made yet. There's a decision to be made if you want to go for zonal freedom or regional freedom from Blue Tongue, which is one of GB's options. You have to do the surveillance that we haven't done yet in order to ensure yourself that you don't have it before you go looking for freedom from WOA, from the World Organization for Animal Health. And that will cost a lot of money. And the decision has to be made, is that the best spend of public money? Particularly as many of us suspect that we'll have blue tongue next year in GB. Because there's 6,000 outbreaks in the Netherlands, and all you need is the wind blowing the right midges in the right direction, and that's all it requires for the disease to enter GB.
I thought there wouldn't be many midges in the winter time.
You'd be surprised. We've been waiting for there is no time even in Northern Ireland when you don't have midges, but you do have times when the temperature drops, when they're not active. But I guarantee you, if you were out last night and you put the light on, there were wee flies around the lights because they were with me, and you're not that far away. So the risk is real. But to get down to the detail of answering your question, a decision has yet to be made as to whether GB will carry out the work that's required in order to achieve freedom. We can't really move on the animals stranded in mainly Scotland until that's done. But my first priority, and I would hope all of our priorities, is to keep blue tongue out of the island of Ireland for as long as we possibly can. There is no vaccine for this particular strain. There is for 4 and 8 that they have in France, but this strain, there is no vaccine. So you get this disease midge-born. It'll be very hard to stop once it gets onto the island, and I would like to lie and will align myself, if that's the Minister's view, with the actions taken in Dublin, and we'll talk about that to ensure that we can keep it for as long as possible out of the island of Ireland. I've heard talks from Dutch vets, and sometimes we think of blue tongue as being a fairly bland disease. There's been no clinical signs in GB yet, but the signs that they talked about when you're getting big infective doses in Netherlands, particularly among sheep, are quite severe. You will not miss this disease if you get it. It's not something that's subclinical. The disease in the Netherlands is quite severe. Anything else on regionalisation, Neil, that I haven't?
No, Robert, I think that covers it all. I think just to reiterate that our own veterinary risk assessment, shows quite clearly that if it was to come to Northern Ireland, the risk is there with an imported animal. That's the likely incursion route, which is why this is protecting against that. And just to highlight as well, the department has been engaging with industry on this quite extensively, most recently on the 8th of February to discuss this issue of regionalisation in GB, the ongoing issues with BTV there and the control of it, and also looking back, I think we tested something like 1,800 backward tracings from when this was first confirmed. So there's been a lot of work around this to date, and it's again just to highlight that VRA, Robert, in terms of likely incursion route if it was to happen.
One other...
Just one other thing. Whenever we've decided what the policy is, I would suspect that government in general will want to talk to these owners about the situation they find themselves in, because it's nothing of their own. They haven't been careless in any way. In fact, they've been doing the right thing. They've been making sure the animals did their period of standstill before they came over. So I would be surprised if the Minister didn't want us to have a chat with these farmers to see what their circumstances were. I believe the total value for cattle is somewhere that are being held is somewhere in the region of 500,000. It's somewhere in that sort of region, and the value of the sheep is I'm not going to say negligible or minimal because they're somebody's sheep, but it's not a big barrel of money that they need for this.
It wouldn't so bad if the owners could see any end to it.
No, I understand. I get the letters, and I understand their pain, but I don't want to put the sheep and cattle industry in Northern Ireland at risk from this. My job is to keep the disease out.
Absolutely. One other issue just before I move, and I'm not going to hold too long. In Northern Ireland, all animals are tagged with UK9 tags. I'm told that's going to change.
Yeah.
When's it going to change, and who was the one who made the decision to change it?
I'm going to throw that one at you. I've talked enough.
So under the EU Animal Health Law, it's been applicable here from 2021, William, UK tags in Northern Ireland are required to change to the prefix XI in order to facilitate continued trade into the EU. It's because UK is not internationally recognised as an ISO code for trading. So indeed, at EU exit, Great Britain was also told they'd have to change their tags from UK to UK to GB, but I believe that a derogation has been available for them post EU exit. For us in Northern Ireland, to ensure the continued access to the EU market, we will need to change over to XI. This is a legal obligation placed upon us by EU Animal Health Law being applicable here. We have legal advice which highlights to us the obligations that are placed upon us to advance this. And again, it is with the purposes, once more, of ensuring that we can still trade with the EU, both live animals and POAO. The Minister has been consulted on this and we've engaged with him. We are due to issue communications on this by way of press release tomorrow. Further to that, we will be engaging with industry over the course of the next 12 months. It is anticipated that we would make the formal changeover in January next year, with the XI tags available from around June time, but to allow a transition period for those tags in circulation, because we know farmers buy them 3, 4, 5 months, sometimes a year in advance, so we don't want to be placed in a position where farmers have tags that they can't use. So there will be a long lead-in time for that, and we've already had direct targeted stakeholder engagement with the UFU tag suppliers and manufacturers to discuss this issue and try and determine what an appropriate timeline would be for that transition.
This is a real problem, William, if we try and lift it away from the politics. We've already had 15 sheep for breeding and production, went to Spain, that were in danger of being sent home again because they had the wrong tag, the wrong ID. They didn't have the Northern Ireland legal ID in them. They had the 17 tag rather than an XI one, UK 17 rather than XI. And I've already had my card marked by the EU on illegal identification of animals. Now, movement of animals from Northern Ireland to other places is a really important part of our strategy for agri-food. We're all aware that 100,000 lambs go south every year for slaughter, and putting that in jeopardy is not something that we want to do. So XI is the number that identifies Northern Ireland, while being part of the UK, as being part of the EU. For SPS purposes, and that's really what the EU is trying to establish, was that when a sheep arrives in Spain, that it's clear that it's from part of the SPS EU zone in Northern Ireland, and has a different tag in it, and therefore a different status than a third country sheep coming from GB, and that's important to the EU, which is why they're making considerable fuss around it. But we will do this in a way that causes farmers, sheep and cattle farmers, the least possible cost and effort to do this. So there'll be we're hoping for the 1st of January next year as a date after which animals should be tagged with the new tag. So there's lots of time to use up your old tags, and we'll see how we'll work with industry to take it through the transition period.
As you know, Robert, we're all guilty of this. People don't like change, and people will not like this.
No. Particularly when it seems so trivial.
Yeah.
And just as an example of how we're thinking about this, for the first period, part of this transition, we won't take tags out of animals' ears. We'll just add an export tag, and we've been there before over the years with export tags. So this will be an additional tag with XI on it that'll go on animals going for breeding and production. Will need it in their ears. That's where we find ourselves.
Robert, right, we'll move around the room here. Anya?
Thanks, Declan, and thank you folks for coming in this morning. I suppose my question is quite a technical one, and it's just going back to the JR. And look, I respect you mightn't have the JR in front of you at the minute, but I picked up on something that I found very, very interesting, and I think I certainly would view it as a possible caveat, and I would like to get your interpretation of it. Paragraph 46 of the JR in the last section, it states that Article 10, Paragraph 1 also does not apply to anything done for the purpose of preventing the spread of disease or for the purpose of preventing serious damage to livestock if it is done under and in accordance with a licence granted by the department. What would your interpretation of that sentence be, Robert?
Going this way. I had reason to be reading the judgment and a commentary on the judgment night before last. And what I would say about it is that there are a lot of lessons that have come out of it, I think, for all consultations across the civil service, and particularly perhaps in agriculture, because frankly there was stuff in there that I'd never thought about The fact that the judgment is recommending that you don't give one option, that you give a range of options in your consultation, and that the evidence that you need to give across each option is much broader than I would ever have thought was necessary. But on that particular issue, Neil, can you help, or do you want to go back on it later?
I need to come back on it later, in terms of the actual article that you're highlighting there, and I will do. I think it's worth noting, though, in terms of a wildlife intervention in the future, should the Minister decide to proceed with one, and depending on what form that would take, it will likely require legislative change. So the references there in that legislation will need to be potentially updated with any future wildlife policy proposal put forward by the Department and obviously consulted upon. So just to be aware of that, and on the particular point in terms of where we stand today on the legislative base, I'm happy to come back to you on it. That's okay.
Thank you.
We have a member of staff, Saoirse, who is just wonderful on it. I have to say, she's made it her specialist subject. It's just it's a joy to listen to anyone who's on top of their subject, and boy, is she on top of this. So if there's something you particularly want to write to Neil on, he'll get you a comprehensive answer.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Nicola?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again to the three of you for all this information. I'm new to this here committee, so I'm learning of my feet very quickly here, but
used to have new faces as well as some of the old ones.
That's nice to hear. Just going back to...
You're not talking about me, you say?
No, I'm not.
Going back to your discussion with William about blue tongue, hopefully you will be able to keep it off the island of Ireland, because it doesn't sound good, but have you considered any kind of financial package or support for farmers who may come up against blue tongue with their livestock?
We haven't considered that at the present time. We're looking at what would happen on the incursion of disease into Northern Ireland if we require animals to be removed. We pay 50% compensation for those animals that we direct to be killed under the Department's direction and order. So there is an element of support in that way, but above and beyond that, we haven't considered anything further. At the minute, we're looking at what surveillance we need to put in place if there was a potential incursion, and also how we respond to that. So that's the preliminary work around that, but we would pay, I think it's 50% for any animals that are removed and that have BTV.
Say hopefully we'll not have to go down that road, but I suppose it's good to have the plan in place. I know.
No problem.
We will have a plan. David will have a plan.
In regards to the TB and the JR we're talking about there and the wildlife intervention, I know that the South had used wildlife intervention as a tool to combat bovine TB. How did your proposal compare to that? And can you comment on the success of that? Was it a successful mechanism or no?
You're looking at me. Look, we use this phrase that TB is a complex and multifactorial disease, and we almost smile when we say it now. But it's true. There are so many factors that go together in a TB strategy and that cause TB to spread that really to say there's cause and effect with anything is very difficult. And that's one of the problems of doing business cases for anything you want to do in TB. People want certainty as to what will happen when you do these things, and it's a biological system, and it sometimes just surprises you in what it does. So the South has went through various stages of their intervention in wildlife. They had just a straight cull, basically, and there's a truism that you only have a number with wildlife. You have a number of different options. One of them is reduce the numbers. If you reduce the numbers, you have lesser chance of badger cattle interventions, and that will surely help the disease. But then you also have to get the numbers down to a critical level before vaccination will work. So the South has went through stages where they culled a good deal of the hotspots, but they're now moving into a vaccination stage where they're having reduced the number of badgers. They're now introducing vaccination, and vaccination is now their official policy. So we modelled ourselves against the results in the South, and that was part of the evidence that we had for the options we have going forward. And of course we also had TVR, test, vaccinate and remove, where you capture the badgers, you test them. If they're positive, you euthanise them. If they're not, you vaccinate them. We had that as a trial for a period. And these options are what we're running through with the Minister at the moment for him to try and work out what our next step is. Minister Putz made his decision. That was quashed by JR. We now need to pick it up and work out what our best options is on wildlife. It is not simple. It will probably at the end of the day require ministerial direction because of the difficulty of making a business case waterproof on this thing. But I think we're all in agreement, as I quoted the Minister earlier on, of we need to look at all factors involved in this disease, and wildlife is one of them. And but I'm not going to preempt the Minister considering this, and I don't get the feeling from him that he's going to consider it for very long. He's intensively looking at this. I'm just going to say in public, I was hugely impressed when I went to talk to him about TB testing that he'd been on YouTube looking at TB tests to see what it was, so he could be ahead of me before I started asking him questions. So he is really engaged on this, realises the amount of money it's costing, realising the pain that this causes to farmers, both financially and emotionally with losing your livestock. And he wants us to move forward on this.
Sorry.
I'll come back on that there. And I suppose it's leaning on that there point about the pressure it puts on farmers, and there's no doubt about that, it does. And they hate to hear that any tests come back positive and that they're going to lose livestock on it. And that brings me to another question I have about the process of testing and how effective it is. Again, new to the role, so this might just be a coincidence, but anecdotally I'm hearing locally about issues with testing, and I suppose actually with tests, animals being culled because they've tested positive, but then a test coming back negative afterwards, or with inaccuracies with dates. So is this commonplace, and are there measures being put in place by the department to mitigate against those kind of challenges?
There's nothing that you and me would talk about on TB that wouldn't take an hour. And this would take an hour. And just, Chair, in the Chair's absence, there is a standing offer there if you want to do a visit. To some of my staff, talk you through some of this basic stuff about what a TB test looks like and how it's carried out. We'll organise all that for you to go out on a farm to make sure you see it. I did it to Minister Michelle in her day, you really only get how difficult this test is to carry out effectively once you've seen people trying to do it. Now, so the TB test is the tool. It's the tool that we have, and it's been used across the world to eradicate TB. So it has worked other places, and it should work here. It has a difficulty in that under field conditions, its sensitivity is around 75%, which means basically that if you test four animals, you get 3 of the reactors, but it leaves 1 behind. But it's very specific. If it's used at normal interpretation, as we talk about, which is a bias of 4 millimetres, which is not very much, just look at your ruler, to make a reactor animal, it has a specificity well above 99%. So if an animal fails the skin tuberculin test, it has TB. What confuses farmers is the language, because when we take that animal to the abattoir, and it's going to go for human consumption in all likelihood, we carry out an examination of the glands. So if you've got a cold, the glands in your neck goes up, well, it's similar to TB. If you have an animal has TB, you'll find it in the glands. So my inspectors in the slaughterhouse working under David carry out inspection of those glands and look for TB. And if they don't find it, the phrase that's used is no visible lesions, which means there were no lesions visible. But farmers go, there's nothing wrong with it. And that is a major issue, is getting around that. As far as they're concerned, you took me animals and there was nothing wrong with them. You didn't find anything. You didn't find a thing. If it failed the TB test, it's 99% sure that animal had TB. Now, again, there's another error on the ifs and buts around that, but let's just keep it at a high level. The animal had TB. The bigger problem with the test is its sensitivity, is the fact that it leaves tests by animals infected behind, which is why we come back in another 42 days and do another test, and another 42 days and do another test, and it takes about 5 tests before you can be absolutely certain. And even after all we've done that, 12% of the herds that are cleared fall again at their first 6-month test. So after having tested 3, 4, 5 times and no further reactors have been found to the skin test, and the farmer opens the doors and sells everything he hasn't been able to sell and spreads them around the countryside, we go back in 6 months' time and we find he wasn't clear at all, and 12% of them. When you get into the details of this, Nicola, you wonder how we ever make any progress at all, never mind stand still. But we can and we will. But it takes a big effort of everybody pulling together to try and get there. And I should have let you do all that.
No, we appreciate the frustration. Like another thing, as Robert's mentioned, when you're leaving ones behind traditional test again, farmers get a clear test and then bring animals to the factory the next week and then have animals with lesions in the factory, and that frustration that we had a clear test now, and that, but it's to do sort of with the test. But the skin test is still the best that we have.
And it has worked elsewhere, and it is a tool. Now, if somebody could come up with a better test, and people will say then, why don't you use the blood test? The blood test gets you a different population. It's not that it's more sensitive, that it's more resistant. It just takes out animals earlier. Because animals, once they're infected, they don't actually react to the skin test until a matter of weeks, where the gamma test comes in earlier. So it's used strategically as a second follow-up test alongside the skin test. If you can invent a new test, you'll make a fortune.
Thank you for that there. Thanks, Chair.
Chair, yeah, thank you. And I'd like to add to the welcome given to officials before. Chair, on that point, and if officials don't mind, could we be given some reflection today on what harm it's done in delivery of the various programmes, plans, initiatives and legislation outlined to us when we haven't had government for 2 years? Bearing in mind, and I'm not trying to lure any of the officials into a political discussion, but in pure practical delivery terms, given that we've just come out of a 2-year gap of government, we had 2 years off government before that, and before that was 3 years without government. What pattern, if there is one, that has had in terms of affecting delivery? And then to go into the question, before I do so, may I say, Chair, that I was the one who was advocating the trap, vaccinate, remove system in the last mandate and on this committee, on the basis on 2 fronts, basically. Firstly, that sometimes fairness isn't cheap. And secondly, that there would be ultimately, hopefully, considerable savings in compensation paid that would pay for the investment in the scheme in the first instance. Moving to other issues, Chair, could I ask that, and Robert was particularly helpful on the blue tongue thing, and like William, I have a constituent affected by this with an animal in Scotland. Are we being fully updated by DEFRA, and is there a timeline to what they intend to do in relation to the analysis of what's going on in GB? That's my first question.
Okay. Decisions on policy for the United Kingdom are made at a group called Animal Disease Policy Group, which includes all the nations, from the CVOs of all the nations and their policy representatives. And that's how we hold it together. So on all diseases, particularly during outbreaks, that's how we make decisions. And that's very useful, John, because the DEFRA have resources and access to expertise that we could only dream about. They have lots more scientists to ask their opinion, and modellers and epidemiologists, and actually we get much more out of it than we give. So that's very useful that the animal health and health policy is made in that place, and there's a similar one for animal welfare. But then we also have to look through it through the all-island lens, because the all-island animal health policy isn't just something for words, it's something that's real, and it's also something that's common sense. So, we'll take the GB thinking led by DEFRA on the policy side, and then we'll try and apply it as well as we can to our different position in Northern Ireland, and the fact that we have a land border with a member state. So that makes things different. On your first point that you made about things that haven't been done, I'd just like to answer on your own specialist subject on animal welfare. As you know, we have our 1972 Animal Welfare Act, on which some of the companion animal requirements for kennels is still based, 72 and 74. And then we came along with the 1981 animal welfare legislation, which was primary legislation, the intention of which was to hang lots of other sub-orders on and get into the detail on companion animals. And we haven't got any of it. And it's just sitting there, and we're now, and on these islands, we're behind on our animal welfare, particularly our companion animal welfare legislation, which I know is something that you're interested in, and which the Minister is interested in. And it's our hope, as I said, to come forward with a prioritised programme. We had a pathway for former Minister, which again fail when the assembly fail, which is why I'm concentrating on this one, because we've got a lot of stuff that we're almost digger ready with, that we'd like to move forward. We weren't doing nothing when you weren't here. We were thinking about these things. But it's of course up to the Minister to prioritise which of the many things we'd like to do. You know, is it Lucy's Law? That my own preferences start there. Is it about puppy breeding? You know, is it about AI, artificial insemination and pets? There's a whole raft of stuff before you even get to boarding kennels and all the rest of it that we need to get on with, because it's something that traditionally Deirdre didn't play, or Dard or Danny didn't pay much regard to companion animal welfare, but we found ourselves behind. Neil.
Robert, I think that covers it well. Just I think in general we do recognise that we are behind other jurisdictions in terms of where we want to be, particularly on the companion animal welfare side. Minister Muir has outlined that this is a key priority for him. Indeed, his first visit was to the USPCA, where he heard some of the concerns that they had raised around outdated legislation, and we're meeting with him in the coming weeks to determine what his priorities are with the resource available in terms of scheduling the work on companion animal welfare. And it goes across, as Robert had said, you know, licensing of doggy daycare, to Lucy's Law, to banning animals in circuses and things like that. So we'll be deciding with him and his approval what he wants to prioritise, and we'll be progressing that forward.
Yeah, Chair, I'm really grateful for those responses. And it takes me very neatly to my next question, which is specifically on animal welfare. I was in an animal rescue sanctuary yesterday, my own constituency, and reminded of the fact, and this relates to all of the issues we've discussed, that animals can't speak for themselves, and we have to act responsibly to ensure that they're dealt with fairly. The department has a programme called Pause for Thought. Could I ask for clarification, how interagency is that, and how many animal welfare organisations are included in that organisation? And also, is it separate to any other organisation which might look more specifically at tackling wildlife crime, in which the department also participates?
I need to say, first of all, that I wouldn't even call it a DAERA-led policy. It is that's how interagency it is. It is very much working together.
John, it's the statutory agencies, it's the police and the local councils and the department working together to combat the illegal trafficking of pups. Stena and the ferry companies are also on that group, because we need access to the land in order to do the checks at the ports in order to try and combat that trade and the movements over to GB. We also, I know there have been calls for stakeholders to take part in that group, but because of the discussions that go on there, they are sensitive and they can be, you know, under data protection and the nature of the things that the group are considering. We didn't feel that it was appropriate to bring stakeholders on that don't have that level of clearance. They're not a statutory enforcement agency, and so therefore we haven't done that to date. We do have a number of groups where we engage quite clearly with our stakeholders, the Northern Ireland Companion Animal Welfare Group being one, who often meet with us or send us representations or correspondence, and we're happy to engage with them on any of the issues that Pause for Thought are looking at, that they would also like to discuss with us in those forums. And I also know that there's ongoing engagement on a regular basis between the department and the police with regards to wildlife crime. I believe they have a wildlife officer within the organisation who is well connected into both ourselves in the department and councils on this work.
Okay, so Pause for Thought. I'll go back to, are there animal welfare organisations on that?
As far as I'm aware, John, no.
No. Are there other organisations that are non-statutory and directly business related? For example, the ports and ferry companies, I get that 100%. Yes. But are there other representative bodies on that are neither animal welfare nor statutory?
As far as I'm aware, John, no. I'll come back to you on it, but I don't believe so. I believe that it's just the statutory agencies, which is why, you know, we have been reticent to bring wider stakeholders onto that group, committing ourselves to other forums to discuss the issues that they have concerns.
Okay. In straight language, John, we're dealing with organised crime.
Sorry?
We're dealing with organised crime. We're not dealing with a man with a van.
Yeah.
And for protection of everybody, we're better keeping the people in the inner ring to the statutory agencies, while working closely with the others, because they're the people with the intelligence. They're the people who are receiving dogs that have been bought, and not what they're not socialised as you'd expect them to be. So we need the intelligence from everywhere. But when it comes to enforcement, there's a health and safety requirement to keep it tight.
I was just going to say to John that there is a dedicated mailbox for Pause for Thought to take intelligence from our stakeholders on the issues of illegal trafficking of pups. And as I say, while there aren't stakeholders on the Pause for Thought, it is just the statutory entities in addition to the ferry companies. We are happy to meet with them at any point in time to discuss those areas and issues that they've raised.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm conscious that Susie and Mark are here for the next briefing, but I want to just let Michelle have a succinct question, a succinct answer, please, for just very quickly before we...
Obviously, the veterinary medicines issue is there's a grace period till the end of December in 2025. We're running close to that. It seems like a long time away, but given the amount of work that's required, obviously the command paper, there's a piece within that which then talks about the veterinary medicines working group being established. I understand that you're working quite closely with colleagues in GB around this as well, and you're doing your scoping paper, but I'm just sort of conscious as to whether or not it has been ramping up and that there is the urgency to it that we appreciate, and whether or not then you're looking at a possible plan B if plan A doesn't work.
And we are very much one removed from this because, of course, like all of these issues, it's a UK government EU negotiation, which we have means of feeding into through the VMD, with which we have good working relationships. But there are solutions to this. But like a lot of issues around Windsor Framework, the issues are political. And when you're trying to deal with the political issues, the mechanical solutions are never elegant, and that's what we're up against here. We either need a political solution or we'll be trying to implement inelegant solutions. It's even difficult for all of us to try and even quantify what size the problem is. The only publicly available information is now a year old, and the medicines and business priorities of these large pharmaceutical companies, most of them being very large, vary. So trying to actually work out which of the essential medicines won't be available is actually quite difficult to do. So the 50% not available figure that the veterinary associations use, and which is the one I need to use myself because it's the only information in public domain, is from a year ago's data, and it will have changed since then. So this is a significant issue, and it's one that needs a solution. But the solution is largely in the political wing, and I'll pass over to Patricia, who's leading on this and actually knows about it.
Thank you, Robert. We do have a very good working relationship with VMD, and they are leading on a lot of the driving of the negotiations which are being taken forward by the Cabinet Office. During this grace period, there is an obligation on the UK to do a plan to produce data every 3 months from now. They've done 3 reports to date. The next one is the end of May, I believe, to basically update on the information around the medicines that may or may not be available. Obviously, this has difficulties because it's so regular that they don't want to get into a position of business fatigue when they're being asked for this over and over and over and over again, that they stop engaging with them. But this is to basically give the EU a confidence that the UK are engaging with this, that they are also identifying what might be issues, what medicines may be problem areas, so that they can analyse the, I suppose, the way forward. At the moment, we are in a bit of a no man's land, but it does give us a bit of a period, which is why I've come on board, to look at the legislation, to look at the issues, to look at the our responsibilities and what contingencies we can come up with, because within to the end of 2025 really isn't that much of a period to do anything. But my role is really to engage as wide and broad as possible, to get as much information as I can, and to get a plan in place with the Minister's approval as to how we tackle this issue.
So to summarise, it's an issue that's hard to quantify. It's an issue whose solution is elsewhere, but we'll be left picking up the pieces at the end. And Patricia's trying to prepare as well as we can for worst possible options on this. There is a significant animal welfare issue on this. And if some of the key vaccines aren't available, it could have serious production consequences for particularly intensive livestock, the chickens and the pigs, if we didn't have the vaccines that we need. They've largely, in the pig sector, replaced the use of antibiotics, which David's very interested in, the antimicrobial resistance part, with the use of vaccines. And if those vaccines were to disappear, it could mean we're back to using antimicrobials again, which is the last place we want to go.
Okay, thank you for that, Robert. And I want to take the opportunity to thank all of you for coming here this morning, and no doubt we'll be seeing you again. Okay, I'm going to move on swiftly here. We remain in public session. We have a briefing now from the Research and Information Services, and we have Mark and Susie here with us. Okay, all the best. He's all there. Yep.
You all right? See you all right?
For photos. Okay. I was going on the show after our election. I was like trying to hunt them down.
Okay, well, item 6 here is an oral briefing from the RAISE, the Research and Information Services. It's page 128 to 157 in your pack. And I'd like to welcome Mark and Susie here who are research officers from the Assembly's Research and Information Service. And I'd like to welcome you, Mark and Susie, and like you to maybe just commence your briefing, and then after it we'll have some questions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I suppose it's been a long time since we've been here, but there's quite a few familiar faces. I know a few new ones as well. So we don't want to bore you with stuff that you don't know, but maybe useful just to give a refresher as to who we are and what we can do and what we can't do maybe as well. I am aware our presentation is in your pack. It's slides 129 to 146. I had hoped that we would have had them here, but
having a few technical difficulties.
Yeah, I think this is a familiar theme for us in RAISE of late, to be honest. We've had, and Susie and myself came down here last night at 5 o'clock and tested it and it worked, which is even more frustrating. But no matter, members, you have it in your pack.
Yep.
And I'll see if I can. I'll try one more thing just to see if this works. Here we go. We're here. Okay, so just a wee bit about ourselves. Susie and myself, I suppose, are here today. We're both researchers, but I suppose just important to give you a wee bit of an overview that the research service is made up both of the research service and the library. And our role there very simply is to meet the information need of members, yourselves, your staff, and I know we would have liaison quite regularly with many of your staff on various issues. And we also provide impartial, objective and timely and non-partisan data to our colleagues in the wider Secretariat as well as yourselves. In terms of a wee bit about structure, this is where we sit in the Assembly. So we're under the Legal Governance and Research Services Directorate. You can see us there on the right hand side. Wee bit specific to RAISE, you can see the two branches there. So library is a standalone, and then it's actually down there as 4 teams, but as of yesterday we now have 5 teams in research. There's a bit of a rejig. Just to give you an idea of numbers, because that's quite a common question we're asked. Roughly at the minute we have about 11 people in the library, a couple of vacancies to be filled there, I think 1. Research side we have 23 staff when we're fully complemented, but we currently have 8 vacancies. Now yourselves, Susie and I are in post. There's other committees who currently don't have a researcher, and it may be some time before that happens because the advertisements only closed, I think it was last week, so there will be an interview process commencing fairly soon there. In terms of just a wee bit on the library, again, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have used it, and I would encourage you to do so. Normally we would have a librarian with us, but today it's just ourselves. The opening hours are there. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail here, but you have access to the support and the materials that are there. The other thing I suppose to say is the inquiry desk is probably one of the most commonly used provisions in the library. And we have an extensive collection of official publications, both hard copy and electronic resources, that I would really encourage you, your staff, to use. There's obviously legislation there, and we can also provide help in the library to do that. And obviously the deposited papers are laid in the library as well. Just in terms of, very quickly, what the library does, you can see there, this was, I suppose, from the last time we had the data, 72% of MLAs had tabled private members' motions, and the library regularly produces information packs. There were a total of 40 produced for that last period we covered on a range of topics, obviously, and those are to inform and to assist in that debate. And those can be done for private members' motions, private members' bills, committee motions. Packs are prepared for all of those. And those draw from a range of sources. In fact, wouldn't be unusual for papers that Susie and myself or other colleagues would produce would be included. And those are generally available on the members' portal in the library. And there's a link to the pack, which is then emailed to members. So I know that talking to various members over the years, they find those very useful. The library also produces a range of reading lists on a range of subjects. Some of the things that we have at the minute is obviously a post-Brexit reading list, which is regularly updated. And there's also an EU Exit Hub, which provides explanatory material on some of the commonly used, but maybe not commonly understood terms. And I suppose that list and that lexicon grows by the day. That's one of the challenges for us in our roles. Just want to then hand over at that point just to Susie, just to give you a very quick, and I realise that was a whistle stop, but we don't want to take up too much of your time, so I'll hand over to Susie for a wee bit of the overview on research. Thank you.
We understand that a lot of you are well acquainted with us anyway over the years, so just briefly again, just with our research service, you can see these are some of the areas that we cover across. Myself and Mark, we sit in the team with communities, infrastructure, environment, agriculture and culture. In terms of my role, I also will cover planning under infrastructure as well. I've sort of kept on the remit of the old DOE days, so I'm sort of showing my age here. In terms of the products that we produce, there's a different range in terms of the level of detail and the size of the product and the amount of time it takes to prepare these. All of our research is, analytical briefs on policy legislation, and we also have our public finance team as well. We deliver both written and oral as well, and for us this is new, just to test as well these screens and what we can maybe bring visually, because normally we wouldn't have had that facility, so hopefully make things a bit more interesting for you. One of the big pieces of work that we do are bill papers to support legislation going through. Last mandate, towards the end, a lot of our work is really taken up by this. And it just is to support the third stage. It will look at both executive and PMBs as well. Gives a bit of background material, just an overview of the clauses, and a lot of our work will look at comparisons as well with other jurisdictions. We have a statistical service, and they provide information both internally here for the Commission as well, and we also have then a dashboard. A lot of the work that goes on here is constituency based, and so these tend to get used quite a lot and are updated on a regular basis. We do have mapping services. We usually have an in-house GIS specialist, and again that's just to bring things to life a bit for us. While we tend to focus on the words, they can bring it to life a bit. We don't have a GIS specialist here at the moment. They tend to be seconded from OPS. Yeah. Then we also do proactive research, and that would be on our blog. and they're just short topical papers, a lot of them just on areas that we think may be of interest or that are coming through, haven't necessarily been requested for. Just in terms of figures, you can see here the bulk of our work does come from yourselves, from committees, and then from individual MLAs. Of course, this does tend to change a little bit towards the end of a mandate whenever legislation increases, that we find that the work coming then from committees increases as well. So we work at around about 900 requests a year, which works out roughly around 45 requests per research officer. Just very briefly, some of the things that we don't provide. So we don't do personal or business inquiries or corresponding with constituents. And also discussing our work or research with members of the public. We don't provide speeches or articles for members, and as you can see from the numbers of requests that we get through, we don't undertake large-scale primary research, and we don't provide legal service. We leave that to our legal experts here. And then conducting research for all party groups as well. This is just, again, where you can find us, either physically up on the top floor there, and then obviously on the Assembly website. But say this was just a quick run through. I know you're all very aware of what we do, so but if there's any questions, we're happy to take that.
Okay. Well, I will say yes, I am very familiar with your services, and I know that obviously on a personal level, but certainly I know that whenever we were working our way through some complicated pieces of legislation over the last number of years, that your support and help was invaluable, and I want to thank you for that. And no doubt we'll be knocking your door in the time ahead as we start to progress through stuff here as well. So, and members, any questions? So, listen, I just want to thank you for coming here this morning. Sorry, it's afternoon now, that didn't get me started, but that was very, very helpful, and we look forward to seeing you again, Mark and Sarah.
Thank you. And members, just as we have closing, I should have said we also included a service guide, the latest version, which if you are looking for any of the contact details under any of the portfolios are there. So, but thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you. And folks, everything's in the pack as well. Okay. Best. Back on time now. Okay, members, we're going to move swiftly on here to agenda item 7, Matters Arising. It's the SL1 Agriculture Student Fees Regulations NI 2023. Last week it was agreed the committee had no objection to this SR. It's in your packet 158 to 164. It's the original SL1s there. Okay, members, are you content to note SL1 for information?
Yep.
Okay. Item 8, EU Affairs Manager, written briefing from Sean McGee, the EU Affairs Manager, page 165 to 210. They're in your pack, provided by Sean McGee, and it includes a general Brexit paper and covers the protocol, amended by Windsor Framework and the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement, as well as ongoing issues such as divergence. Paper summarising the Brexit issues within the remit of the committee. If you have any questions on these papers, you're content to note these papers at this stage for your reference and information.
Yep.
Okay, we're in public session for the next item here as well, on subordinate legislation that asks for your patience as we go through them. We have this as a formal procedure we have to go through for each statutory rule. So agenda items 9 to 18, subordinate legislation report by the examiner statutory rules. We continue to deal with the backlog of statutory rules that have been laid in this mandate. Last week we had sight of the ESR's report, who didn't draw special attention to any of the ESRs we're dealing with and at this agenda item. As with last week, there are a number of departmental officials available here today in the public gallery if members need any further information or for questions on an SR. And okay, so there's.
We might need to wait and see if they're coming in.
Okay. Okay.
It's okay.
Shows and chairs.
You there?
Use those chairs there. Okay, we're just waiting on the officials. Should we need them?
We may not need them.
Some here, some will sit here. Okay.
Again, if necessary.
Oh, you part of that.
Maybe a slow
It's a
process.
bad time to send her to go to the toilet now, is it?
We've enough here now.
Obvious. Going up to the toilet.
Okay.
Are you coming back? Yeah.
I'm making bother.
You just sit here.
Chairs there.
Okay, that's us.
Okay, so as with last week, there are a number of officials here and the public gallery. If members need any further information or have questions on the ASR. Okay, and I want to thank the officials for coming up as we deal with these ASRs. Members, I want to remind you that in usual circumstances we would have seen the SL1 in advance of the SR being made. The SL1s are also available for information, mostly in your committee pack. There's one in the table pack. Okay, members, we'll go through a number of statutory rules for consideration and approval. Number 9, SR 2022-286, producer responsibility or obligations, packaging waste amendment regulations, NI 2022, pages 211 to 222 in your pack. The ESR has made no comments in respect to this regulation, which is subject to negative resolution. Members, have you any questions for the officials, or are you content that I put the question? Okay. Okay, I'll put the question. The Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs considered SR 2022-286, the producer responsibility obligations, packaging waste amendment regulations, NI 2022, and there's no objection to the rule. Members, okay? Number 10, SR 2023-183, the producer responsibility obligations, packaging waste amendment regulations, NI 2023, at pages 223-234 your pack. The ASR has made no comments in respect to this proposed regulation, which is subject to negative resolutions. Members, have you any questions for the officials, or are you content that I put the question? Okay, I'll put the question that the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs have considered SR 2023-183, the producer responsibility obligations, packaging waste amendment regulations, NI 2023, and no objections to the rule. Okay. Number 11, SR 2023-219, the producer responsibility obligations, packaging waste amendment number 2 regulations, NI 2023, at page 235 to 244 your pack. The ESR has made no comments in respect to this regulation, which is subject to negative resolution. If you have any questions, officials, are you content that I put the question? Content. Okay, the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs considered SR 2023-219, producer responsibility obligations, packaging waste amendment number 2 regulations, NI 2023, and there's no objection to the rule. Okay, content. Number 12, SR 2022-288, the Waste Management Licensing Amendment Regulations, NI 2022, page 245 to 250 your pack. ESR has made no comments in respect to this regulation, which is subject to negative resolution. Members, any questions, or are you content that I put the question? The Committee for Environment, Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs considered SR 2022-288, the Waste Management Licensing Amendment Regulations, NI 2022, no objection to the rule. Members, okay? Okay, number 13, SR 2022-302, the Environmental Offences, Fixed Penalties, Miscellaneous Provisions Amendment Regulations, NI 2022, at page 251 to 257 of your pack. ESR has made no comments in respect to this regulation, which is subject to negative resolution. Members, okay if I put this to the committee? Yep. Okay. Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs considered SR 2022-302, Environmental Offences, Fixed Penalties, Miscellaneous Provisions Amendment Regulations, NI 2022, with no objection to the rule. Members, okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Number 14, SR 2023-5, the Edible Crabs Conservation Amendment Regulations, NI 2023, pages 258 to 268 of your pack. ESR has made no comments in respect to this regulation, which is subject to negative resolution. Members, okay if I put this? Or have any questions? Okay. Okay, I'll put the question. The Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs considered SR 2023-5, the Edible Crabs Conservation Amendment Regulations NI 2023, and there's no objection to the rule. Members, Ned?
No.
Okay, item 15, the Aquatic Animal Health Amendment Regulations NI 2023, page 269 to 283 your pack. ESR has made no comments in respect to this proposed regulation, which is subject to negative resolution. Unless members have any questions, can I put the question? Okay. The Committee on Agriculture, Environment, Rural Affairs considered SR 2023-163, the Aquatic Animal Health Amendment Regulations NI 2023, has no objection to the rule. Okay, have enough. Agenda 16, SR 2023-179, the Specified Diseases Notification Amendment Order NI 2023 at page 284 to 293 your pack. The ASR has made no comments in respect to this regulation, which is subject to negative resolution. However, I would like to highlight that the Department has official sensitive protection marking on the SL1 paper as the information is sensitive relating to policy development and legal matters. Members, okay? Put this rule. Put the question. The Committee for Agriculture, Environment, Rural Affairs is considered SR 2023-179, the Specified Diseases Notification Amendment Order NI 2023, has no objection to the rule. Content?
Yep.
Number 17, 223 to SR 223-211, the Waste Fees and Charges Amendment Regulations NI 2023 at page 294 to 305 of your pack. The ESR has made no comments in respect to this proposed regulation, which is subject to negative resolutions. Members, okay if I put the question?
Yep.
The Committee of Agriculture, Environment, Rural Affairs considered SR 2023-211, the Waste Fees and Charges Amendment Regulations NI 2023, has no objection to the rule. Okay?
Yep.
18, SR 2023-212, the Beef Carb Production Scheme Regulations NI 2023, pages 306 to 319 here pack. The ESR has made no comments in respect to this proposed regulation, which is subject to negative resolution. Unless members have any questions, Michelle?
Just a comment in relation to it, Chair, because obviously I raised it earlier with Norman when he was in, and just the impact this may have as a consequence on the market and how that might be sort of skewing that slightly. So,
yeah.
Not sure.
We don't anticipate that this has a market, because I did hear the question, or an impact on the market, because I did hear the question earlier, but obviously as we go through we do monitor what's happening, and there will be continual updating and continual review, but the BCR scheme is not there to interfere in the market, and I think that's probably the most important point.
No, it's just that it could be an unintended consequence of that.
But we have a monitoring and evaluation in process and a review process, so we'll continually monitor that. But that's not why it was how it was designed or why it was designed. As you can see from the SL1, it was designed to improve productivity and reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Appreciate that.
I'm glad you stopped me mid-flow there, Michelle, as well, because just there was a question that was in my head earlier as well, because there's some farmers Rosemary had raised with us as well, about the fact that some of the traditional breeds may mature slower than the commercial cattle. You know, would you be content that this scheme is robust enough to facilitate that?
Yep. We've undertaken, before we introduced the scheme, a very significant amount of analysis looking at all of the cattle breeds and when they were finished or when they were sold for slaughter on the APHIS or now the NIFAS system. And we firmly believe that age-at slaughter of finished beef cattle is strongly influenced by management decisions and doesn't confer any specific disadvantage on any particular breed or system of production. Mm-hmm. But again, as I said, it's a voluntary scheme, or it will have said in your papers, it's a voluntary scheme, and there's no penalty for non-participation, and I think that's also important. So we do have a review mechanism built in at the end of 2 years of the scheme, and we'll look at that. And we are talking, as the committee will be aware, to a group of stakeholders who we've co-designed the scheme with, and that is ongoing. And to date, no significant issues have been raised about the scheme.
You feel the scheme is robust enough
yes.
to involve like the traditional breeds of cattle, which some farmers, many farmers feel mature a bit slower?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that, Rosemary. Okay, so members content?
Sure.
Okay. Where were we? Oh, sorry. The Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs considered SR 2023, the Beef Carbon Reduction Scheme Regulations NI 2023, and has no objections to rule. obviously apart from some of the some of the issues we raised. Members content? Okay. Members, that completes the consideration of SRs for today. We do, however, still have one further SR to consider from the backlog, which is SR 2024-16, the Farming for the Generation Schemes Regulations NA 2024. The Standard Statutory Rules has drawn attention to this SR, and we will not be considering it until next week. Ms Kelly's comments can be found in her second ESR report, page 14 of the tabled papers pack. She states that the regulations make provision for a power of entry in Regulation 9.2. Ms Kelly has had discussions with the Department on the inclusion in these regulations of a power of entry as drafted. The Department has advised that this provision may be removed. The Department proposes shortly to make and lay amending regulations to remove this provision. The ER is content with this approach. Members, this SR will come before the committee next week's meeting. Is that okay? Right. Okay, member, item 19 is the SA 2024-192, the Greenhouse Gas Emission Trading Scheme Amendment Order 2024. You'll be aware from last week we now have one statutory instrument to consider. If you recall, last week we had a briefing from Richard Coy and agreed to hear from him again in the future for a more substantive briefing on the Greenhouse Gas Emission Trading Scheme. The SA today is similar to those last week in that it is making a minor technical change to the scheme and is at page 320 to 325 your back. The SA which is subject to negative resolution. I'm going to put the question. The Committee for Agriculture and Rural Affairs considered SA 2024-192, the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Amendment Order 2024. There's no objections ruled. Members content?
Content.
Okay. Members, we're going to move on to correspondence, and again we're still in public session, which is item 20. Oh, sorry. Thanks very much for your attendance today. And you are free to listen to the correspondence if you want to, but you are also free to head on. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, members, correspondence at page 327, and the correspondence is at 330 to 429 in your pack. Okay. I'd like to draw your attention to several items of correspondence. One of them is from the Mineral Products Association NI. Briefing paper dated the 20th of February 2024, pages 330 to 42. MPA represents companies engaged in the supply of primary aggregates, the processing, recycled and secondary materials, the production of downstream processed products such as asphalt, lime, mortar, ready-mix concrete. Members, you can tend to add the invite to visit a site to a list for potential future visits and receive either a written or oral briefing from MPA NI.
Intend.
Okay.
I think when I spoke to Chair, he was proposing a written briefing in the first instance.
Remember, the Chair proposed a written briefing in the first instance?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, remember, I refer to correspondence your packet 343 to 345, noting that Minister Moore has written to Andrew Bowie MP, Minister for Nuclear and Renewables, Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, to confirm his agreement to the publication of the UK Government's response to a UK-wide consultation on the UK policy framework for managing radioactive substances and nuclear decommissioning and the associated finalised UK policy framework, which will extend to here. Members, are you content to note at this stage, and do we wish to receive an oral briefing from the Department that the framework is finalised? What do you think?
Yep.
Yeah, we'll get a briefing from the Department when it's finalised. Okay. Okay, members, correspondence at page 346 to 348 of your pack. UK-wide statutory instrument, the Sea Fisheries Amendment Regulation 24. The Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs therefore intends to lay a UK-wide statutory instrument, the Sea Fisheries Amendment Regulation 2024 at Westminster on the 20th of February, which was yesterday. Correspondence is to advise that the ERA Committee, the Minister has given consent to the making of this statutory instrument. A summary of the provisions in the Sea Fisheries Amendment Regulation 2024 is included in Annex A. Are we okay to note that at this stage?
Intention.
Pages 349 to 355 in your pack from the Clerk of the Assembly, Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee, that this is forwarded by them and the original correspondences from the European Affairs Subcommittee on the Windsor Framework to the Windsor Framework Committee regarding organic eggs production. The Ulster Farmers Union has been lobbying the House of Lords European Affairs Subcommittee on the Windsor Framework, seeking an extension to the derogation on feed composition as GB organic legislation is currently under review, with no publication likely until the end of 2025. Until then, GB farmers will continue to produce organic eggs according to retained legislation, meaning their production costs are lower than here in the north. UFU are requesting that the derogation should be extended until after the publication of the British revised organic legislation. Non-commercial movement of birds. This is correspondence from the House of Lords European Affairs Subcommittee on the Windsor Framework to the Minister for Biosecurity, Animal Health and Welfare regarding the EU delegated regulation on rules for non-commercial movements of pet birds into a member state from a territory or a third country. Members, in both cases, the clerk to the DSC has stated that the DSC has considered the regulations and they do not fall within the scope of the DSC's purpose and function, and therefore have been copied to us. The reasons for them being out of DSC scope are regarding the organic eggs production item. This regulation is an existing EU law that applies under the Windsor Framework rather than an amending, replacement or other new EU law. And regarding the non-commercial movement of birds, this regulation is not an amending or replacement EU Act. Members, it's likely that we will continue to receive these letters from the DSC committee. However, at present time, the volume we will receive is not yet clear. Therefore, we need to reach an understanding as to what the role of this committee actually is in connection with these matters. I propose that in the first instance we seek advice from the Assembly's EU Affairs Office and also write to the Department asking what actions they are taking regarding seeking derogations and extensions on derogations such as that requested by the UFU in the letter. Okay. Members okay that course of action?
Yeah.
I refer to correspondence 356 to 428 from the clerk to the Committee of the Finance regarding the report on the 2022 review of the effects of the Public Service Pensions Act NI 2024. Okay, note.
Yep.
Members, refer to correspondence in your pack at 430 to 431 from Sean Kelly of the NI Environment Link regarding an invitation to their food and farming conservation event on the 26th of April. More information will be provided near the time. Okay to note at this stage.
Yep.
Members, I refer to the correspondence dated the 26th of February in your tabled pack, page 8 from the Clerk of the Committee for Finance regarding the matter we considered last week from Barry McDonald KC regarding Victoria Square residents. You will recall that we have written to the Department seeking further information. Okay, note that, folk, till we get a reply from Dara.
Yeah.
Members, are you content to action the remainder of the correspondence as outlined in the correspondence memo, or is any member any specific issue area they want to raise?
Yep.
Members, please also note the correspondence memo media articles of interest. Number 21, Fast Forward Work Programme, page 432 and 433 of the pack, brings us through to the 21st of March. You will note the additional meeting with Minister Muir is now in the draft Forward Work Programme for next Tuesday, the 5th of March, plus 4 additional departmental briefings, proposed briefings from the Ulster Farmers Union, NI Environment Link and the Office of Environmental Protection that would take us through to Easter recess. NIEL confirmed yesterday that they will be with us on the 21st of March. Members, by then the briefings will have given you a complete overview from the department and from a number of main stakeholders to allow for consideration of the committee's strategic plan. On that basis, are you content that the clerk starts planning towards holding strategic planning away day early in the weeks after Easter recess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you any comments at this stage of potential venues for a planning day?
Just on that, Chair, could we consider County Fermanagh?
No. The bias there, I suppose.
I'd say the Chair might agree with me if he was here today.
The Chair here, he might consider that too. Can we note it, Sharon?
Yes, I've noted it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, members okay to note and publish the draft Forward Work Programme? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, any other business, folks? Okay. Well, thank you very much, folks. The date and time of next meeting, we're meeting here next Tuesday. Now, don't forget Tuesday. Tuesday with the Minister at 2:15 p.m. in this room 30. And then the normal, and the normal. No, sorry. This room 21. Sorry, the meeting with the Minister in room 30, and we're back then in this room next Thursday, room 21, for the normal weekday meeting. And adjournment. I want to thank you for your attendance, and the meeting is now adjourned.
Committee Room 21. Sound. Committee Room 21. Sound.